Country. Welcome, everybody. We have an awesome guest here today. It is none other than Dave Whipple. Dave is the host of the popular channel on YouTube, Bushradical. He is a builder, off-grid living expert, of course, cabin builder. He's lived in Alaska. He's lived in Michigan, or he does live in Michigan. And of course, Dave is on Alone Season 4, the same season my brother and I were on. And he also has been on the show Yukon River Run too. So it's got a lot of fascinating and amazing stuff to share. Dave, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me, Jim. It's kind of a class reunion. Before I started YouTube, you know, Brooke and I met you and your brother Ted on Alone, you know, so that's actually pre-YouTube.
That's right. Yeah. Well, me too. I didn't really do much YouTube before. I had a channel, but posted to maybe 5 times.
You'd done the Ungava Peninsula.
I've done the trip. Yeah.
Which made us all feel inadequate and stupid.
That was my Alone warm up.
Totally. Yeah, and that's like John Ray, Samuel Hearn stuff. And most people are like, "Who? What?"
Right. Yeah. I know.
Yeah.
Exactly
You're the only guy I could talk to about this. Samuel Hearn and John Ray were Hudson Bay factors, and they did these amazing cross country.
John Ray did some crazy Arctic stuff.
Yeah. You're the closest guy to John Ray I know.
Thank you. Of course, I have a GPS and a sat phone, which helps. But
he put a set of moccasins on and then apologized to everybody who couldn't keep up as he just walked away from them.
Yeah, some unreal adventures, man. Crazy. But you've had some too, Dave, and you're telling me, so you're in your 20s? You're a young guy. You moved to Alaska.
Not now.
You were very well. We're both young guys. Come on.
Yeah, sure.
We're just a couple young guys. But so you're pretty young at the time. You moved to Alaska, and you decide that you are going to build what is a 12 by 12 cabin on a remote piece of land in the Alaskan bush, essentially. How did you come to that decision, and what was that like? Was it a big jump from your life before that, or how did that pan out?
Well, I wish I had a simple story to tell, but it's a lot of little short seasonal stories. I'll give you the 1-minute version. I grew up right across the pond from you guys in Michigan, right in about the middle of the state. Graduated high school barely, and then started pouring concrete and playing in a band after school.
Cool.
In 1998, Brooke had graduated from college, and she'd had a year where she wasn't getting an internship, and then she finally got an internship at a place in Wisconsin. So she was planning on going to Wisconsin, and her and I had been to Alaska previously, and I flew up, and she'd spent a summer there the previous summer. Long story, right? Yeah. But so it's like a lot of these little seasonal jaunts. Anyway, in 1998, we got engaged. She went to Wisconsin to do a year internship, and I drove my 1980 F-150, which was just a pile of garbage. I drove it to Seattle, and my plan was I was either going to go fishing in Dutch Harbor, or I was going to drive up to Alaska and work on one of the military bases. Because the only marketable skill I had was I was a cement guy, right? I'd played in a band, which paid nothing. It's it's just like a dead end for everybody but the people who are really great.
Hard to get around here.
Yeah, and cement sucks. It's hard, but it's one of those jobs like pumping outhouses. Like when you get that job, nobody's going to tell you what to do because they don't want it. They want to, if you're a carpenter, every Tom, Dick, and Harry is going to walk down the road and be like, "Oh, you're doing this wrong." When you're a cement guy, they leave you alone, man.
Nice.
Because they're like, "I'm not doing it."
Right.
And there's like a panic to concrete. The truck comes and
starts. Forms break.
Yeah, the form's breaking, things being level, things getting, problems with the batch plant, with the mixer truck. And then as soon as your material's on the ground, it's like a ticking time bomb. You have X amount of time to make it right, or it will be wrong permanently.
Right.
So it's kind of a fun job, right? Yeah. But I knew that I could go to Alaska and work concrete and make real money. Because I was making, $6 an hour in Michigan when I started. I think I was making $8 in the late 90s when I left Michigan. So I'd been given this phone number in Seattle of this guy who had a fishing boat in Dutch Harbor. So this is so honky, you know, like there's like, I don't know the guy who gave me the phone number. It was just like, oh, I used to fish there. Here's this, go talk to this guy. Never been to Seattle. I got a truck that's just held together with baling wire. Yeah. So I drive to Seattle and literally like I go down to like the processing plants, like on the docks. I had to find the docks. There's no GPS. This is the 90s, right?
Right.
I got a map from the gas station.
Right.
And I run into these people and they're like, oh yeah, that guy's not around here. He actually owns a boat. This is like where they can fish. And so they actually direct me to this guy who is real and he has a boat, and I go meet him and he's got like half of his head missed and like he'd been in some kind of an accident and like lost part of his scalp.
Wow.
And he was like this crusty Norwegian guy, and he's like, you know, he's like,
cool.
He's like, yeah, he's like, I'll put you on, you know, and it's like, well, I can't guarantee you nothing. You know, I'll get you 0.5%. Yeah. And if we catch 1 million fish, you'll get 0.5% of 1 million fish. And if we don't catch nothing, you will bust your ass all summer long and go home sore and broke.
Wow.
I was like, ooh. And he gives me like a list of sweatpants and extra tufts and like, buy all this and be here tomorrow. Yeah. And it was literally like one of those moments like, okay, what do I want to do with my life?
Right.
Do I want to gamble on this fishing trip, which will be an adventure? Or do I want to go to Alaska and pour concrete? And I know I'll make money.
Yeah.
And I stayed in this flea bag motel in Seattle. I mean, it was pretty sketchy part of town. Yeah. I got up in the middle of the night and I was looking out and I had my old truck with a topper and it's full of tools and stuff. And there's like guys like looking in the back of my truck, and I'm just waiting to
out of state plates.
I'm just waiting to open the door and be like, get on the ground, you know. Hope they run. No.
Oh, okay.
No,
okay.
But what do? You know, just
you pretend you
got to figure something out.
Right.
But nobody ever broke into my truck. And I laid there all night long, and I'm like, you know, I don't want to risk putting in all this work for the chance of making money. Yeah. The fishing thing would have been cool, and I was in.
Right.
I'm like, I'm gonna drive to Alaska and pour cement. So I literally I didn't even call the guy back, which was a douche move.
You wouldn't do that again.
No, I was like 22.
But you don't have as much guts to just be as much of a man when you're that young too, though, don't you?
No, and I was, you know, I just.
You're maybe scared of the dude. He had half of a head.
Oh, yeah, this guy was way tougher than me.
He looks like he's speared whales before.
Yeah, it's like all those guys on Deadliest Catch. He's like those guys, you know, and you could tell that, like, he probably had a fuse about that long. So I wasn't even going to make the phone call. I'm like, I'm just going.
Yeah.
And now, a word from our sponsor.
Okay, how's it going, everybody? Just take a little bit of a break here to talk about a company and this company's product that I've been using for a very long time. It is Garmin, and specifically their 66i handheld GPS unit with in-reach capabilities. I've been using it on all of my remote expeditionary trips for multiple years. Northern Manitoba, you know, up in the Arctic, up in the Yukon with my family for all different things. And the reason it's great is because it's a do-all device. So it has an SOS button in case, you know what, really hits the fan, which sends a message to the search and rescue monitoring station, and it's interactive. So you can actually talk back and forth with responders as well to help them find your location, etc., etc. And the in-reach capability also enables you to send texts or emails via the satellite. So you can text back and forth, and that can also include your exact location. So, you know, no excuse not to have something like this nowadays. It is small enough that I can just store it in my pocket and tether it to myself. So, you know, a satellite phone is great, although the satellite phone is not something you're keeping on you. So typically there's satellite phones, let's say, in a pack in my canoe. Well, if I lose my canoe canoe in a rapid like you saw me do in a crazy dump in the Yukon one time, where is your phone, right? You might not access it, but being able to keep this on your person is just a game changer for me. So I'll put it in my pocket and just clip it to my belt. The display is a good size too. This is a 3-inch display, but you can also connect this device with the Garmin mobile app on your phone, and you can save waypoints, routes, tracks, etc., and then sync them with the device while you're in the field. So you don't need a Wi-Fi connection. This thing is just a beast. You can tell that it's just made for hardcore expeditions. And the battery, if you set it to expedition mode, will actually last for 200 hours while it's marking your location every 30 minutes. And that's what really makes the pairing of the InReach and the handheld GPS capability work. So you don't have to worry that you're soaking up too much batteries for your emergency communications equipment while you're also using the GPS. The 66i offers free direct to device downloads of bird's eye satellite imagery as well. So you can have those maps, and you can also have your topographic maps. It comes with detailed topographic maps. So the other thing the Garmin 66i has is the ABCs, and that's altimeter, barometer, and a 3-axis compass. Sometimes I have these large open water crossings on remote bodies of water, and being able to get a firm grasp on what the weather is gonna do through using the barometer could be a real lifesaver. You can also do inReach to inReach messaging, which is really helpful when my wife and I are, spending multiple weeks in off-grid cabins in places like the Yukon wilderness where there is no cell service. I'm off, let's say, on the snowmobile or in the mountains somewhere, and I can talk back and forth to her regardless. And so it really gives you peace of mind, and it's super, super handy to have that capability. So yeah, I gotta say, Garmin 66i, you've seen me using it in my videos on all my expeditions for probably the last 4 years, and I can't say enough good things about it. Garmin 66i for the win.
And now back to the show.
So I literally, that morning, I made my mind up in the truck with the engine running. I'm like, nope, I'm going to go to Alaska.
Nice.
And I drove up through Cache Creek, Hell's Canyon, up to Prince George. And then, long story short, worked all summer in Alaska, came back to Wisconsin. Brooke and I got married that fall. Worked in Wisconsin all year. So in the summer of 1999, we went back to Alaska. We were going to operate in the Fairbanks area, but we got an opportunity in Sitka. So we spent the summer in Sitka. I was pouring concrete. She was working for a chocolate factory, and we were caretaking the campground, Star Gavin Campground.
Wait, and so she was working at a chocolate factory in Sitka.
The Abroma Chocolate in Sitka.
That's so cool.
And it's still there.
That seems like an unlikely connection. I don't think chocolate when I think Sitka. I think
it's odd, yeah.
Hemlocks and rainforests and salmon,
Yep. And we went, every evening we would go out in the Sound when tide was low enough for hip waders. You could walk way out and we'd fly fish pinks. Wow. They're coming out of the deep water, and they're really fresh, and they got sea lice on them. And we had the only power outlet in the campground, so we'd smoke salmon. Wow. It was a pretty idyllic life. That's how we went to the Aleutians. When we left Sitka, we went to the Aleutians, and we spent 8 months caretaking in the Aleutians.
So you went to the Aleutians before you ended up building the cabin.
Yeah.
And sort of,
Okay. So it wasn't, I wish I could say I went to Alaska and built this cabin, or we went to Alaska and built this cabin, but there's all these little 3-4 month side adventures in there.
Well, we don't want to miss that part.
But it's such a clustered story, right?
No, it's awesome, man. I'm loving it.
So the Aleutians was completely off grid. It was that was the first time I'd ever actually lived totally off grid. In Sitka, we were just in a campground. We had a fifth wheel we bought there, and we were.
You're on an island, though. I mean, it's only a ferry.
Yeah.
There's no road access. The closest road would probably be in BC or in maybe Skagway, or there probably wasn't a road into Skagway then. So it would be in BC.
There was a road into Skagway.
Was there? Okay. So very multiple day ferry ride to get to the closest road.
Yeah. Skagway was probably a 14-hour ferry ride. Because that summer I did go to Skagway. and did some cement work in Skagway, and then took rent a car and drove up to Whitehorse. So I know the road was in that summer.
Yeah.
So in the Aleutian Islands, there was this homestead that had been built in the 70s, I think. And it wasn't actually in the Aleutian Islands. It was on the very tip of the Alaska Peninsula.
And so we're talking about in the Bering Sea, right? Like in between Alaska and Siberia, essentially.
Yeah, the end of the peninsula, if you're in Michigan, you say, I live here, and you show your hand.
Right.
If you're in Alaska, you do this.
Ah, okay.
And so, like, at the very end of the peninsula, before the island chain starts, that's where we were. And we were the only house on the peninsula. Yeah. And that was, like, we had a creek with a little dam in the creek that fed into a pipe that ran a water wheel. There was a big battery bank. So that was, like, true, like, professional off-gridism, right?
Right.
Like, these guys had internet back then.
No kidding.
This is 1999.
Wow.
But, like, the colder it would get, the water level would go down. The lights you'd have less light that you could use. And then we would have to, we burned wood, and the wood came from the ocean. You'd go find logs on the beach that came from.
I was going to ask. So it's all driftwood.
It came from who knows where. We never knew what we were burning.
Could it have potentially been coming from Russia?
Sure. Asia. Wow. It ain't coming from the Aleutian Islands because there ain't a twig on the Aleutians, So you'd get these logs, you'd hook them up with the boat, drag them back to the homestead. There was a boat launch made out of railroad tracks, and you'd roll the logs up the boat launch and then cut them up, split them up, and it's so windy they actually dried enough to burn pretty good.
Not bad.
So that was definitely a totally off-grid experience. And when the weather would get colder, the creek would start to dry up because it was just a spring coming out of the hill, and then you'd have to go to the water wheel down on the beach where the pipe like spun the water wheel to make power. You'd have to shut it down slowly and then like take a fitting off and put a smaller fitting on, so it was like more of a jetted stream to spin the well. So you're always fiddling with this like hydroelectric power setup, right?
And would that not freeze up in the winter?
No, as long as it was running, it was fine.
Oh, okay.
You'd have to go up the mountain every day and at the dam where it all went into a tube, like just PVC pipe that went down the hillside. You'd have to go and like pull all the weeds out of the grate. Wow. You'd be like, the lights are getting dim. I better go pull all the grass out of the, out of the dam up the hill.
I've seen your YouTube video where you actually go, you show a bunch of pictures and you talk everybody through the story of this.
Yep.
This is a very different looking landscape.
Oh yeah.
Like just stark but beautiful, mountainous, icebergs and ice flows, and you really look like you're at the edge of the earth.
Oh, it was something. It really was. Like right across the straits, because the straits it's called False Pass, and I think they call it False Pass because nobody should take a ship through it. It's really hairy. But it's got a big bay on one side and then a tight bottleneck. And then on the north, it's the Bering Sea. And if you go out the south, you go to the North Pacific. Neither one of them's terrifying. You're like boating. Like if you go down False Pass and you start to get towards the Bering or the North Pacific, like the land parts and opens up, and then it's like that's the Pacific Ocean. You're like, you turn the boat around. You're like, hey. And so it was.
Don't want to have anything to do with it.
And False Pass, the town, was on Unimak Island, which was the first island. And
Unimak, is that Yupik language?
I think it is. I think it's Yupik.
Because it sounds like the kind of boat, like Umiak, you hear it called? Like a walrus skin boat.
Yeah.
Sounds a similar pronunciation to that.
Right behind the town, there was like a 10,000-foot mountain coming from the sea, basically. So it's a dramatic landscape. We had a few really interesting things happen to us there, mostly just stir craziness and just the insanity of being isolated, which is really difficult after a while because you you think of all these things you want to do with your life, but your life is like, it's like being in prison because you ain't going nowhere, right?
Sounds like Alone just a little bit.
Oh, yeah. It's got some of the same flavor to it.
Yeah. How long were you there for?
7.5 months.
Wow.
We were there from like September to May, I think. And like when we would go get our mail, we'd literally like launch the boat. We had an 18-foot plywood boat made by Ren Tolman. If anybody knows, Tolman skiffs are like famous. This guy in Homer would make these plywood and fiberglass boats for net tenders and stuff. And this thing was ultra seaworthy. It was really a great boat. It sounds like a dinghy in that kind of water, right?
Right.
But it could handle it. It could handle it better than your heart could handle the water, you know, because we got some water that was terrifying.
Also ice too, when you're dealing with ice and stuff like that. I was looking at some of that though. I'm surprised, I guess because of just ocean currents and stuff like that, and because you're right sort of out there in the ocean, it doesn't really, it doesn't freeze solid either.
No.
So you're not ever in a, which actually makes it more remote because you're never in a position where you could just, you know, walk across the ice to get to town or snowmobile or whatever.
Walking, the pass did get plugged a few times with ice where it's plugged.
Yeah.
And walking across that, there are spots where you could walk 400 or 500 yards across where it's really narrow. You know, the straits are narrow.
Okay.
But that would be like being like Peary up at the North Pole, you know, where like you're standing on ice 1 second and the next you're falling
so
into the
like
water, you know,
iceberg, ice pen to ice pen kind of thing, and it can
like,
open up. And
it's like the Shackleton expedition, you know.
Right.
So it was never an option.
Yeah.
But we would boat through the ice flows a couple different times to get to town for mail or groceries or whatever, you know, something new to eat. Just boredom. You want to get out of the house. So we'd launch the skiff and like pick our way through the ice flows, and there'd be dolphins in there.
Wow.
Or porpoises. I don't know the difference really. Big fish.
They're mammals, Dave.
I know, but you know.
Yeah. How did you land this gig?
It was in a magazine called the Caretaker's Gazette. I think it's still out there where they're like just advertising for crazy people to come sit these places no one wants to be.
Yeah.
And this guy, his name was Buck Lakaitis, and he was a halibut fisherman. And I think he had some enemies, and I think he didn't want that place to sit there by itself.
Huh.
I think he was afraid if he came back, he'd just be a smoldering pile, you know, because you could burn somebody's house down out there and get away with it. You just go out on a windy night. Yeah. And we had the only skiff in the water.
Yeah.
So it was hairier than even we recognized at the time. Like if we have a problem, there is no help.
Right.
None at all.
Right.
We actually had a walkie-talkie that we kept in the boat that we could radio the town. Yeah. And we never used it, never needed to use it. We were in some water where it's just like, just hold on, you know, just people tell stories all the time, you know, I was out in Lake Erie, you know, there's 14-foot waves and I was in this 12-foot boat. And well, a 4-foot wave feels like a 14-foot wave when you're in it.
Right.
And we were in some stuff that was...
Are they measuring from the bottom of the trough or from the regular water level?
I just measure it by the terror that you feel when you're like, whoa, boom, you know, and the boat just spray everywhere and you're like, there's no help.
Yeah, no, I know.
We either get back or we don't.
Waves just is beyond insane when, you know, but sometimes people might say 14-foot waves. And honestly, it's like kind of the only way that someone who doesn't know what a 4-foot wave is will understand what they're going through. Yeah. So
if I tell you we were in some 4-foot rollers, you're like, oh no. Yeah. Because that's the reality of it.
It's gonna swamp you.
But nobody else is gonna. Other people will be like 4 foot's
and
nothing.
4-foot breakers is now another hole because that will definitely swamp you.
Oh, it's terrifying.
Fill up with water.
It's giving me just goosebumps to talk about it. You know.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
But yet somehow it seems like this experience inspired you though, because this was before you decided that, okay, not in the Aleutian Islands, but then you decided to, hey, let's basically build a cabin in the Alaskan bush and live there. So there must have been something about this that you and Brooke thought was pretty cool.
Well, what we were kind of looking for at that point in life was kind of what we've always shot for, is just to do something fun and interesting and not have to conform, you know?
Right.
Like the idea of just being stuck doing something that you're bored with on day one, and you just want to be somewhere else. It's like we're going to do anything we can in our lives to avoid that.
Right.
So caretaking a homestead sounded a whole lot better than like applying to work at Arby's.
Right.
You
Oh,
know?
for sure.
It's like, well, this is way better, you know, and they'll pay us like $200 a month.
Arby's isn't very yummy either. 200. Oh, you got paid money too
Yeah,
and everything. Some people probably would do that for the experience nowadays.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
Neither would I.
But so we had a couple cool things that happened in the Aleutians other than just the terror of boating out there. And, you know, we had a pot of killer whales come in on us one day. We're watching these killer whales. They were up and down the pass. And when we went to town, they popped up. And they're about 150 feet away from us. I'm like, oh, you know, when you're on the water, they're 75 feet long. You know, they're not, but, you know, they're fin of the big bull in the bunch. You know, it was sticking out 4 or 5 feet above the water. And I'm like, I got that boat as close to shore as a human can boat, right?
Yeah.
I'm looking in the water and I can count the rocks. You know, I'm running in 3 feet of water. Yeah. And they squeezed way into the shore and they're just checking us out, you know, and there's like 5 or 6 of them.
Were they thinking about eating you? Or they're just checking you? Who knows? Because they don't typically eat people.
No, but
they are called killer whales.
But on the other hand, when you're in the water with them, you can't bring yourself to imagine that that's not possible.
Right.
You're like, I'm going to get away from these guys.
Even a giant fish when you're snorkeling can be scared. That doesn't even have teeth, right? Like it's just, that must have been a really cool experience, though.
So yeah, it was super cool. That was awesome. A lot of cool stuff happened in the Aleutians, but it was also a crazy 7 months.
You never went back for a second 7 month?
No, never did.
No.
But when we left the Aleutians, we went to Fairbanks. Brooke went from Fairbanks and worked with Neil Eklund on his log raft when he was actually, it was like the 1 year that he ran it as a business.
Right.
And my little brother came up and him and I did construction. And then the following summer, 2001, Brooke and I bought a little piece of property north of Fairbanks, about 10 miles. And that's where we built that little tiny cabin. And that was, even though the Aleutians were really cool and being exposed to an off-grid situation and having all the levers to it, you know, we took care of that place for most of a year. When we built our little cabin, we bought this piece of property and it had all of this timber on it that had been cut. And it was cut for a power easement. There was actually power there. So it was partially off-grid. It wasn't completely off-grid. But when they cut the power easement in, they left like 70 logs that had been seasoned for 2 years. And it's like, well, we're going to build a cabin.
Perfect.
So it cost us like $3,200. And we worked at it all summer long and peeled all those logs and stacked up a Hudson Bay style cabin.
Oh, wow. How much did the property... How much did you pay for the property?
$6,500 for 2 acres of permafrost.
Yeah.
It was nice land, though. It was pretty. But if
what did it border onto, though?
Behind it, there was a couple hundred acres that were owned by a mining company. And that was really interesting land because you go down into that valley and there's all this machinery from like the 20s.
Wow.
Just rotting in the woods, you know. And nobody had touched this area for most of 100 years. So I don't know what they'd planned to do, if there was any future plans for like this valley. But there were several hundred acres in there that was, you know, it was owned by a mining company, but there was no mining activity there.
Right.
And then when you get outside of Alaska just a little bit farther north, because we're up by the town of Fox, you get a little bit farther north than that. And basically anywhere you go is the middle of nowhere. You walk off the road and there's not another road to walk to.
Wilderness.
Yeah. Like where we're at now, we have a piece of property 20 miles north of Fairbanks. Yeah. And if you walk straight west, you'll hit the coast before you'll find another road. Wow. And the coast is 500 miles west.
Yeah, I don't think people understand when you get up to some of those cities or towns in the north that You don't have to be very far out of them to just have no power, no cell service.
Oh, yeah.
No nothing. And behind you, oftentimes there's one road coming through town, and behind you is just endless amounts of just mountains and rivers and alpine lakes and you name it, man.
Yeah. And a lot of it is unaccessed.
Right.
Because there's not... Here's a good example. In the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, there's this history of logging, and I'm sure there is around here too,
All the Great Lakes forests.
Absolutely.
Everything that, all the water that pours into the Great Lakes was all heavily logged.
Yeah. Interior Alaska doesn't really have a history of logging.
Right.
So there isn't a road system from the logging days. There isn't, you go to the UP, there's thousands of miles of old roads, and they were originally logging roads, right? Because they're going nowhere.
Right.
They're just wandering around the bush, and it's lovely.
Yeah.
But in Alaska, you've got a few main roads, and then you've got a few trails here and there that go who knows where.
Yeah.
But there isn't. So the rivers are really the highways, which
Right.
you'd know more about than I would.
Right.
You get on a river and you find there's villages on rivers that have no road access. They might have an airstrip now, but. So Alaska's great in the fact that it's of how remote it is. But when we built that cabin, kind of the idea behind it was we can buy a cheap piece of land. We can build a cabin with material that's already here. All we got to do is do the work.
Right.
And we can own something in a couple months that would take... if we went and bought a house that has a well and a septic and a washer and a dryer and a color TV and 3 bedrooms, and that's awesome. But at that point in our lives, I don't think either one of us had the job stability or the credit to deal with that.
Were you doing a Yukon River run at the same time as well?
No, this is 14 years before that.
The working on the raft though. Before they made a show out of it.
Brooke worked with Neil on his log raft in 2021.
Okay,
Excuse me, 2001.
Yeah.
Excuse me, 2000.
2000.
I'll get it right. Just give me a sec. And Neil built this raft. This is a beautiful raft. It was like 70 feet long and 30 feet wide. It's got all the tents on it. And he kitted it out, and he had tourists come in. So he was running it as like this pirate tourism business.
Right.
Because Neil's kind of a pirate,
So he didn't need to actually have any real estate. He just ran it off of this enormous raft and essentially floated it down the Yukon River.
Yeah. And people would come in for a 5-day stay, and he'd take them fishing up the tributaries. And
so did you actually move that entire raft from one point to another? Or did people just sleep on it and then you did day trips off of that? Or did you actually travel with that whole raft down river and then try to get it back up?
Well, I didn't really have any part of that summer. Brooke was working for Neil, and this is 2020, before the cabin. Brooke was working for Neil, and Neil would get a group of guests flown in, and then he would float the raft down the river and park it in different spots. And then he had 2 skiffs, and they'd take the skiffs, and and it was Neil and Brooke and a guy named Dougie, and that was the crew. And I was asked to go out on it, and I regret not going out on it. But I'd already asked my brother, who was only 18 at the time. I said, well, fly up here. I'll put you to work. We'll work together for the summer. So he was already here, and I couldn't do it.
Right.
But I flew out and spent, a week out on the raft, and it's an amazing thing.
That's cool.
To be on a great big giant
it's not a small
raft.
thing.
No, and it's magical because there's kind of nothing else like it,
I just looking at this sort of way that you managed to sculpt this, and I just see it as such a smart way to go about it. Like we're all taught, we all think, the dream is you buy this house, but real estate is expensive.
It's getting worse, right?
And you got to spend a ton of money with the bank. And that means that day to day, you're forced to, make money, maybe work a job you don't like to be able to pay that mortgage off. Mm-hmm. And sure, you hear people saying, there's good debt and all this. That's good debt. And I'm not saying that there's not any truth to that. But what I feel like is that was sort of the first step to you being able to live frugally in what people like us consider a pretty fun way to live, or pretty exciting way to at least give a shot at living totally off grid in an amazing place like Alaska, and have sort of the ability to then kind of build your own foundation of what it is that you want to do in life without having to work for someone else and only have bits of time at the end of the work day to go. Obviously, you know, you were working, you were doing your own thing. Brooke was doing her own thing as well. But I feel like that really gave you kind of like a freedom where you weren't necessarily tied to a post and had to, you know, make that payment at the end of the month or lose your house.
Yeah.
Do you think that making that decision early on was a good stepping stone for what you sort of ended up doing and becoming as you know, people that have built so many cabins and have owned a number of really interesting rural properties?
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things that a lot of people in the off-grid space want is they want freedom from being in debt, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And people want to do things themselves without being under the thumb of the bank or the county or whatever. And growing up, my grandpa was always that guy. He hated the idea of like asking permission to because he had built his own house. Yeah. He had a little cabin. It was a cute little cabin. It was back by a creek, and he had a lot to do with my perspective on life more than anybody else, my grandpa, because he knew exactly what his beliefs were, you know. And I remember one time I had a cousin who bought a house, and they were saying, yeah, the loan payment's only $600, which was nothing, you know, still is nothing.
Right.
Considering what real estate is. And Grandpa said, you can nail together a lot of boards every month for $600. And it never left my head. And I've always kind of wanted to be that. Always kind of wanted to be the guy at the end of the road, just like leave me alone. I'm going to be as far away as I can. I don't want to be a hermit that doesn't have any interaction with the world, but I always want to be on the outskirts of things. Yeah. Like I want to be like, you go farther than where I'm at, and you're in the Tules. Right. and like I want to be that. I always wanted to be that person that was a hoarder of freedom, I guess. You know, like that's the one thing I do hoard. I like hoarding my free time. Right. And I like hoarding my own decisions. Yeah. And so building this cabin was like, okay, we can have our own place completely paid for and have this cozy little house on the prairie type. And
still have people, like you still like people.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. You know, obviously, you know, you're sitting here talking to me right now.
We came a long way to talk to you.
Right? You did, man.
In the snow.
In the snow and in a storm. We only just got power on before you got here, too, thankfully.
It was pretty nasty.
Yeah, it was. But I see, so was your grandfather also the kind of guy, because when I watch, you know, Bushradical, and just from talking to you and knowing you, you make frugality cool. Okay. We live in a society where, you know, you have to have things, and you know, people want bigger, better, faster cars. You know, they want the best snowmobile, you know, they want top of the line, everything, and fancy, expensive stuff. Right. You seem to have a way of spending less money and yet coming out with something better. And I see it as something that interests you as a hobby.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, but also extremely, you know, I don't sometimes like the word hobby because it sounds like just frivolous. Yeah. Because this is a very extremely useful thing that you've managed to do as you know, that has contributed, from what I can see, to the sort of foundation of the exceptional life that you and Brooke have managed to build for yourselves. And one of the things that I noticed was that, you know, two of the things that were take homes from me, and this is from what you share on your videos as well. Why would you buy something new that an item that the technology has not changed on?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Yeah, and the one thing you mentioned was Grumman canoes. You can go and buy. They make them a new Grumman canoe or a springbok, which is aircraft aluminum with pot rivets built like a de Havilland Beaver.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or you could buy an old one that's the exact same. The hand saws, you could get one at a flea market, a crosscut saw like for lumber.
Yeah.
That actually has a good wood handle that is better than the new ones with the flimsy handles. You know, the ones that the handles aren't even connected at the bottom; they just snap off. And
Absolutely.
stuff? Yeah. Is that? Could you expand on sort of that way of thinking a little bit?
Oh, there's so much to talk about in that line.
Yeah.
I talked about this in a video. I'm sure you're referencing that. Like the canoe is a great example.
Yeah.
It's like in Michigan, probably like here, you can go buy a canoe any day of the week for $150.
Right.
We're blessed to be in an area because you go to Alaska, any canoe is going to be $700 because there's just not a bunch of them. But in water country like around here, there's a lot of canoes. So in Michigan, I can go buy a $150 Grumman canoe almost any day of the week. And that's like high water mark. They never really made a better canoe than that. It's built like a bomber. Yeah. You know, it's built like a fighter jet. It's the same company.
Also, zero maintenance necessary. Pretty much.
Yeah, and I would even lump those old Colemans in there. Those old plastic Coleman canoes. Yeah. Like they don't seem to mind the sun. You chuck them out in your yard 30 years later, jump in them and paddle them. And
Grummans are better.
Yeah,
for sure.
But
that's
like
a new guy.
Another thing is I'm a guitar player, right?
Yeah.
And in the world of guitar, like guitar players hate change. Yeah, like if you see bass players, right? Bass players will play funky new 8-string monstrosities, they're just like, handcrafted by some guru in the mountains or something, Guitar players, given a choice, we want a 52 Telecaster, we want a 59 Les Paul, and if you buy a new one, we want it made just like the old one, because that's as good as it ever needed to be.
Right.
And
you're not the sound can't get any better.
No, it really can't. And compound bows are a great example of this too. Like the bow I had when I was a kid, I had a Darton SL50. Yeah. And by today's standards, man, it's such a joke. But it's absolutely as lethal as any bow out there if you know how to shoot.
And I had a Bear Whitetail too. It was my first compound bow, and it's actually kind of shaped like a bow as opposed to the new ones that are just like a bracket, right? With the flat, almost completely flat. But man, the relief on those new bows is good.
It is. But compound bows are kind of like snowmobiles. Like every year they shave a pound, they get half a mile an hour faster, and like, oh, you got to get the new one. And, and it's like, honestly, if you bought a fiberglass Bear recurve from the 70s, as far as recurve bows go, they haven't improved at all. Those old bows are, if you buy one that's good, that doesn't have twists in the limbs, like that's the high water mark. They still make them like that. That ultra fine fiberglass wood laminate, and it's, you can buy an old Bear recurve for $200, or you can buy a new one for $9. And it's like it's insulting to think about spending money where you don't need to.
Where it's the exact same thing. Why the technology cannot get better. Right. I mean, those bows that you're talking about, that technology was dialed in on probably, a couple thousand years ago, if not more. We just started making them in modern material.
Different process, different material.
You're getting into compound bows, and that's very different territory, right?
There's Plains Indians bows that are probably not as usable because they have super high draws and they're super short and they're made with horn and things like that.
They're meant for horse archery.
Exactly. Though, but they're kind of a high water mark, and we're probably just trying to chase that to get something that light and that strong, that's got that kind of a pull, that kind of penetration. It's like, you don't need any of that to go. If you want to get into whitetail hunting, for instance, and I'm not a whitetail bow hunter anymore. I used to sit in a tree and get buck fever and wing arrows. And I love to shoot bow, but I was never a good hunter. I get the nerves, man. I get excited, when you see something. So I fish.
Right. Yeah. I love fishing too.
But if you wanted to get into whitetail hunting, the world is going to present you with this. You need a scent lock suit. You need to get yourself a camouflage quad, which makes no sense at all. You know, you can't see it, but you can hear it for 4 miles. You know, and you're going to need a good bow. You're going to get yourself a $11 or $12 or $1,500, and every year the bows get more expensive. And it's like, I have a Darton. I have the same Darton that it's not the same one I had as a kid, but it's the same model. I bought it at a flea market a couple of years ago where it was $25, and the guy couldn't find anybody that would give him $25, and he's like, "Give me 20."
Yeah.
I'm like, "Here's your $20, man."
Nice.
I got the bow that it's the same model I had for all the time growing up. Shoots great. It's as good as I am.
Right.
Because I'm not as good as these high-tech bows. If I want to go shoot a hay bale for a couple hours a day, you know, a Darton's all I need. And so I guess to wrap that thought up, the world and everybody who makes something for the outdoors is going to try to get you on the best, the newest, the fastest. And it's like, you don't need any of that stuff.
I mean, I forget who it was, but I read in Field and Stream, one of the write-ups was that they're selling at Bass Pro Shop a rope specifically made for getting up into a tree stand with. And it's camo, and it's like double the price of just going, I think it was Bill Heavey, just double the price of just like buying a regular rope at your hardware store and just as strong, right?
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in that. How important do you think that sort of base line, you know, we'll call it making frugality cool, because it's really cool. Like, you know, you're not cheap. You're not being cheap. You're making it's interesting. It's functional. You're learning how to make use of things that are still good. You wonder how much of this consumer driven society that always wants us to buy new things because that drives the economy.
Yep.
How much less of a drain it would be on the world's resources if everybody did that. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
You know,
and I think it would be, like you said, though, manufacturing drives the economy. If people stop buying these things, then there's
would
less
it be
people.
bad?
But do we have to keep?
Right.
Do we have to keep making new versions and trying to sell them to people? Can't we find something else to do for a living than to make a bow that's 2 feet faster per second than the one last year?
So what you're saying is that there's probably some truth that that's the way it is, but it doesn't have to be that way. And it kind of sounds like what you're saying.
Practicality to me is sexy.
Yeah,
like if something doesn't make practical sense, I don't want to be part of it.
Right.
And it's like I went into a boat dealership in Alaska, and they got these, Phantom jet boats that one of these dealers sells, and they're inboard. And this guy's showing me, look at this whole shot it can do. It can get up out of 2 inches of water and drive it across the sandbar and through the woods, and then it'll go in the next lake. It's like
that sounds awesome.
It's like that.
I would just be like, yeah.
And that is cool.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong.
But you like your old Johnson 10 horse.
Yeah, I got a Johnson.
I got one down in my lower shed.
I got a 35 horse long shaft on my smoker craft. The motor, I think I paid $400 for. It's a 1959.
Wow. Yeah, mine ain't running anymore.
And I could help you with that. It's probably coils. The original coils split and they oxidize, and then you might get it to fire in a barrel, but it will leave you stranded on a lake. Ask me how I know. Throw new coils in those old motors, because they really didn't ever make them any better than they did in the 50s.
Right.
In the 50s, they were making millions of boat motors. It was hot. Boat motors were more popular then than they are today. Everybody wanted to get a little boat out on the lake. OMC made, 6 million motors in the late 50s. And it was the height of precision engineering. So you go buy a 4-stroke Honda today.
Yeah.
It's probably a better motor, because Honda's high watermark of engine manufacturing, right? But that OMC from the 50s that your granddad had, chuck a new set of coils in that, rebuild the carb for $11. And that thing's going to run longer than you are.
Awesome.
Yeah. Fill it up and go, man. And then you're doing the thing for nothing, and you can move on and spend your money somewhere else in life.
I just got a 6-horse Suzuki, and
that's my next bike. It's got an inboard gas tank.
I've got an inboard or the outboard gas tank.
Yep.
It's so light. It's got a good handle to carry it.
Yep.
It runs as quiet as a sewing machine, and it's peppy too. I see that, but also, you know, if you already have something that works, you know, it's already taken all that, you know, from the world to build that old thing. Yep. You're probably better off, even though it might be worse on gas, to keep that thing running than to buy a new one. But, you know, some of these newer technologies, man, like that little Suzuki I just got is kind of a beauty, you know?
I'm not a zealot.
Yeah.
I'm very practical. Yeah. Pragmatic maybe is the right word for it.
It was way more expensive though.
That Suzuki has been on my mind for a while. This is a good story. You'll appreciate this. Remember Adam Fry?
Yes. He was on the Lone Boot Camp when we were there.
He was on our Lone Boot Camp back in 2016 in New York, which is weird. That's where we met. It's like New York.
Yeah. Right? New York City, pretty much.
Adam calls me up. This is probably 4 years ago now. I'm in Alaska, pouring cement, right, doing YouTube.
Yeah.
He calls me up. He's like, hey, I'm part of this show, 100 Days Wild. It's going to be filmed on the Tanana River. Yeah. This is like my backyard.
Oh, yeah.
So he's like picking my brain about what the country's like, what the game is like, you know. So I'm calling him. We're talking like every day on the phone as he's getting ready. And he came in. And Adam's a great guy, man. Yeah. All of us were, you know, jacked up at boot camp, trying to, you know, you're trying to beat the other guy, trying to get your spot. And I'm sorry that he didn't get to go, because he would have been an awesome addition to it. He's got a lot of heart. He's a good dude.
Yeah, I like him.
So we took and spent the day. When he finally got to town, we took a day and spent this day. You know, I got to show him, like, here's my cabin. We'll take you up in the mountains, you know, and. Anyway, when he finally got that show done and it aired, he's going down the Tanana River and he swamps a canoe. And I'm looking at him, because this is one of the best shots of the series, right? And I think they made him like get in the river to like walk out of the river again. Like, we didn't get that shot.
Right,
he's like, I'm freezing to death, you know?
Yeah.
But anyway, he had one of those Suzuki outboards, and I'm like, that's a 6-horse with an inboard gas tank?
Yeah.
I'm like, dude, what is it? Because I think they had it covered over. Like, so I called Adam, and I'm like, what is that motor?
Yeah.
It's like forever, Honda, their little 2-horses had an inboard tank, but the 5 didn't.
The 5 doesn't. I have a 5 too. I can't find a freaking impeller for it though.
Oh, really?
Yeah, very, very challenging to find one. But it doesn't have the gas tank. Now, the Suzuki one, it runs dry pretty quick. Mm-hmm. You're only getting like maybe 3 miles off of that one tank. But whatever.
Yeah, you don't need a hose and a bulb.
And you can put if you're running on a smaller boat, you can bring a full jerry, put it at the bow of the canoe, whatever, if you're running empty. You know, I love it.
So to me, that was like...
But, you know, I also, and I get it, Dave, but I'm also going to admit that I was trying to get the Honda 5 running. It was driving me crazy. I got the wrong impeller. Honda was telling me it was the right one. I was driving all over the place. I said, screw it. I went and bought this Suzuki, and it was like $2,000. And you know what I mean? And so I just gave up, you know. This Honda runs fine. Might not be as peppy, but it runs fine. Plus I have that 10-horse. So I'm just wondering... You know, that train of thought, and if you go back from when, because it sounds like you've been sort of incorporating that train of thought in your sort of like, in your lifestyle for a long time.
Yeah.
How important has it been to sort of, and how much of a realistic necessity is it for, you know, real off-grid living? And when I talk about real off-grid living, I don't talk about like the stuff that you see on TV, which is dramatizing. I mean, like the kind of stuff that you do and that you and Brooke have been doing for a long time.
Yeah. Well, I think that doing stuff yourself, whatever it is, you know, when you run across something you don't understand, learn it.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of people in the world who are just not interested in learning something that they could hire out, or, you know, they run across. When we built that cabin, because we wired that cabin, we had no running water, we had no indoor plumbing, but it did have electricity because there was a power line easement.
Okay. So you built a 12 by 12 cabin.
Yeah, and it had power.
And you had power.
Yeah,
that's sweet.
And our electric bill was like $11 a month. Right. It was lovely.
Yeah.
So you could go in the cabin when it's 50 below, and you've been gone a week, and it's 50 below zero inside the cabin.
Right.
Get a fire in the stove, kick the lights on, wait an hour, and you could watch TV because we had a TV like up in the corner. We used to watch Little House on the Prairie on DVD up there. We'd sit in a loft, and the TV was opposite the loft, like up in the peak over top of the door, just waiting to fall off and kill somebody when the, you know, it was like an 80-pound TV, you know. But kind of the idea of always being ready to learn something new and always being ready to, you know, that dyed-in-the-wool do-it-yourselfer mentality. Right. It's like I've always done my own mechanic work. You know, if I needed to change a transmission or an engine, I would do that. I've been to tore carburetors apart 1,000 times and changed ball joints and drive shafts. And
I have a thing I say that's like, just try.
Yeah.
Just really try.
Yeah.
And, you know, part of the problem is you hear all these things and it's this kind of very like business minded way of thinking. It's like, well, don't take time to do any of these other things because that takes you away from taking the time to, you know, make money on what your job is. And don't, you know what I mean?
It's probably not wrong either, really, you know.
But if it's a hobby and you're getting real fulfillment out of it. This is why I look at it. You're getting real fulfillment because it's more than just a hobby. It's helped ground. It's like that thing. Don't buy coffee every day and you'll have enough money to go to Jamaica for a week by the end of the year.
True.
Kind of thing, right? So I'm just seeing that attitude as really paying into building that foundation to be able to then kind of live the life you live and not have that 9 to 5. But even more so, think about how much that has helped your YouTube channel. Because now you have a way to monetize it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, if you just had to start a YouTube channel, you didn't know how to do all these things, but all these things you've kind of wanted to learn and figure out all over the years.
It's all been monetized.
Of a sudden, boom, it's all freaking beautiful and people love it, you know?
Honestly, like, I guess it's also been like a dyed-in-the-wool part of my personality. You derive a lot of who you are, I guess, from being capable.
Right.
Whatever you're capable at, right?
Right.
So I was always trying to know how to fix this, or like if we're building something, I'm gonna learn how to do plumbing. So I know how to do plumbing. I'm a decent electrician. I wanted to build years ago. I wanted a guitar amp that was an awesome guitar amp, like a Marshall Stack, and I'm like, I don't have that kind of money. So I learned tube electronics. It's like I could open up your Trainer amp right now in Canada because it's a Canadian brand, and like, you know, diagnose a circuit board, and that was the worst learning curve because none of that's easy. But it was like that. It was this poverty-based do-it-yourself mindset that like I'll figure this out and then I won't have to pay for it type of thing.
Right.
And honestly, now the YouTube channel is successful enough that I'm basically like a wealthy person with a poor man's ideology, and I can't get rid of it.
Yeah. Well, you can take him out of you can take the child out of the
exactly.
You know? So tell me a bit. Go back a bit. Tell me, because I remember about, you know, where you grew up in your childhood a little bit in rural Michigan.
Yep.
In you know, and I remember you laughing kind of at yourself because there's one time when a dam got blown out.
Oh yeah.
And there was like 1,000 crayfish at the bottom.
You remember that?
Yeah,
huh?
I remember that story, and you're sort of laughing like, was this really a good use of our time to go there and harvest all these crayfish and have like one popcorn-sized piece of meat per crayfish?
Yeah, we took an aluminum flat-bottom boat and we filled it with smelt nets. Yeah. We filled it with crayfish, and I mean 400 pounds of crayfish because they let the dam out to fix the dam. It was the most amazing summer because there's great big leatherbacks and big snapping turtles, and I was always a turtle nut. I can't leave a turtle alone, man.
Love turtles.
I see a turtle, I'm catching it.
100%.
100%.
Yeah.
So there's all these great big turtles going, where the hell am I? You know, they got washed down into the river, and the bottom is black with crayfish, and there's mud puppies, stuff you never get to see, right? You know. And the first bend in the river was full of big northerns, and it's like the pond is just a mud wasteland, and it was amazing. My dad and my cousin Danny found a metal boat, not even aluminum; it was steel.
I know. With the air, the seats are full of air, right?
I don't remember. These seats were full of rust.
We had a couple steel boats when I was a kid.
They found this boat out in the middle of the mud flats, man. We spent like 3 days, like waist deep in mud, trying to dig this thing out, and then like floated it out the channel.
Cool.
And I love that stuff, man. Couldn't get enough of it. But to your point about being frugal, and like where we lived, it was all these families have been in the area for a long time, and there was my Uncle Billy and my dad, and then my Uncle Doug, and then my Uncle Bruce, and they owned the old family farm, and then across the street was my grandpa and grandma. And our family owned a bunch of land, a couple hundred acres, which I don't know how they ever got it, because nobody ever was wealthy in this group, right?
Right.
And then everybody else owned, big chunks of land around, and all the kids would wander on the neighbor's land, and there was ponds and creeks. And there was a little town about 5 miles to the north. There was a little town about 5 miles to the south. And like my dad was a hoarder. He had like automobiles. He had like 50 cars on his 6 acres of land.
For parts.
Yeah, it was rotting into the ground, So I was pumping the brakes and holding the flashlight from the day I was born, type of thing. And getting into the whole YouTube thing, a lot of that do-it-yourselferism,
Right.
and that just willingness to try something, to figure it out, and encouraging people. I've actually been able to monetize that with YouTube, and I never would have ever had that opportunity without YouTube.
Right.
Maybe podcasting at some point, but it's kind of a whole different thing.
It's same with me. Well, people, why are you learning all this? What do you want to be when you grow up? Well, you don't know. Sometimes when you do what you want to do, and you do what makes common sense, and you follow that path, things change. The world's changing quickly, and it leads you to somewhere where you can monetize it doing something that is pretty awesome. I mean, YouTube is a great job.
Nowadays on YouTube, almost anybody, if YouTube is really a game of choices.
Yeah.
It really is. Because let's say you would like to do YouTube, you don't know what you don't know what you have to offer, right?
Right.
But can you make an omelet? Can you fry an egg?
Yeah.
You can make a whole channel about nothing but omelet recipes, because people love omelets. It's all about what you can do, that you would do, that you might have some experience and knowledge in, and matching that up with what people want to watch.
Right.
There's 500 omelet recipes in the world. You could just put out a channel called The Omelet Wizard. And maybe you're not a chef, maybe you're not a professional, but you could take that journey with people. Be like, today we're going to try this, and whip it up. And,
it's a disaster.
Yeah, and if it is, be like, this is the worst tasting garbage I've ever had. And people be like, this person, I love them. They're showing me all these cool recipes. If something sucks, they tell me.
Yeah.
Really, like one of my heroes.
Yeah.
And this is a Canadian thing. Because,
okay.
I'm an American, you're a Canadian, but I invade your country a couple times a year, spend some time, got some friends here. Yeah. One of my heroes in life is Steve Smith.
Okay.
Red Green.
Okay, yeah.
And I'm not talking about, I like his show, he's funny. I'm talking about the guy's actually, like, his philosophy. He's one of my heroes. Yeah.
The character or the actual actor?
The guy, Steve.
The actual guy.
Yeah, because the character's great, and he's partly that guy.
Right.
Because
it comes so natural.
It's so natural, He's But I read his biography one time, and he made this show that's super popular, and it had all these just like local, everyday people characters.
Right.
So he basically made a diamond out of like the rocks in the driveway.
Right.
And the Yoopers had done that also. Yeah. I always thought Red Green was a Michigan thing, because it's so similar culture, Yeah. But the Yoopers, they had this, comedy music group. I'm sure you know who they are, right?
The Yoopers?
Yeah, the second week of deer camp, and all the guys are here.
So I'm going to be honest with you, Dave. I'm sorry, but I don't. I know what a Yooper, like you're from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. But I don't know the band, the Yoopers.
This would be in the late 80s, early 90s. Yeah. It was this band of people from like the west end of the UP. They did comedy sketches. They put out tapes. You'd buy them at the gas stations. Yeah. And they sang songs about drinking beer and farting and driving around bush roads.
It sounds like the McKenzie brothers sort of a little bit. But
Probably very similar. Yeah. But what it kind of put in my mind, Red Green and the Yoopers, is like, these guys are doing something where they're not conforming. These guys aren't punching a clock, and they've basically taken what's around them and it's like this judo move of life, you know, to take your surroundings and like make something other people want to experience with you about it. And I read Steve Smith's biography, and the Red Green Show, they're just cobbling stuff together. He's like, snowplow, I could use a snowplow, but it costs money. So I'm going to duct tape this plywood to my van. And like, and it's ridiculous, so right? Good. But on the other hand, it's like, I read his biography, and he says, all I really wanted out of life was to be able to succeed at something I wanted to do and not have to conform.
Right.
I'm like, dude, this guy gets it.
Yeah.
And so he's funny. I love the Red Green Show, but like, this guy always wanted to not punch a clock.
Yeah.
And he wanted to do something that he enjoyed doing. And he just was like anything but just, conforming to, the 9 to 5 where I work down at the mill and put bags on the truck. And then when the truck goes, I get more bags and ready to put on the next truck.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
and then you just see all those timestamps going by for 4 years worth. I feel like you have to have a flavor of that, and maybe it's right for some people. I don't want to knock it for some people if that works for them. But for
a lot of people,
it's just like I feel like you have to be able to take this like quantum leap of faith and sort of jump and grow wings on the way down, like the expression goes.
Yeah.
And take that fearful leap. For me, it was, I'm going to just go into business somehow doing my expeditions and doing this outdoor lifestyle, creating content. It was for magazines at first, even before I was on a loan.
Yeah.
And literally being $35,000 in debt and having no idea how I was going to pay my bills at the end of the month, and keeping on telling myself, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go into business when I pay off my debt, when I do this. And I had 2 gigs that dried up, including one I worked in mineral exploration. And I just basically just went, bonkers. And somehow, miraculously, things worked out for me. Like I literally, Dave, I would come home from doing an expedition in like northern Quebec and find a check I forgot that I was owed. And like drive home on fumes in a truck that I borrowed from my buddy's used car dealership. You know what I mean? And be like, we're saved. Like, it's like as if God himself put it there.
He probably did.
Right. It really felt like it, right? And but I feel like you that's what it takes, I think, to be able to jump out of that lifestyle, is just belief in yourself. You're going to feel stress and stuff, but you're going to go do it. And that's kind of like, it sounds like that's sort of what you did when you up and went out west, and then you went up to Alaska and you built this first cabin, and it led to so many different, cabins and full homes for your whole family that you built. But what I want to know, and I hear this really cool upbringing that you have, that you had in this rural area of Michigan. But what was it? Because you hear a lot of people that, might grow up like that, but they want to move to the city. Kind of the grass is greener on the other side for some people.
Yes.
Or they don't want that. What was it that kind of sparked your imagination, your interest in kind of this more adventurous life and more wild places? I know we talked about an author that you used to read.
Well, you're referring to Ben East.
Ben East.
Ben East wrote a lot of stories, a lot of great bear attack stories. I know you covered some bear topics on some of your other podcasts. I'd like to get to bears at some point.
Okay.
But at that point in my life, right, growing up in Michigan, we had the Upper Peninsula.
Yeah.
It's like if you guys are in the Toronto area, right, you got this area.
Right.
You got, you're up north a couple hundred miles, and it's bush, and it's beautiful. Well, in Michigan is an incredibly north and south state, because you can't go east and west.
And it's all lakes.
It's all lakes.
Like a horseshoe of lakes.
Yeah, so you're in a peninsula, right? Yeah. So Friday night, everyone's going north. Sunday afternoon, everyone's coming south.
Same as it is around here.
Exactly,
or in Toronto, anyway, southern Ontario.
And we had the Upper Peninsula, and the Upper Peninsula was the best you had.
Yeah.
Very rarely would somebody go into Ontario, like up past the Sioux.
Yeah.
And the UP is, it's an interesting place. There's a lot of beautiful country in it.
Substantially further north than where we are now, actually. A lot of people think that everywhere in Canada is further north in the States, but so much of Canada lives in that big south dipping. It's like a big point, that comes down to like Lake Erie to, almost the western side of Lake Erie. So many people live there that a lot of Canadians actually live. That's well further north. And I'd say that probably right now that, we'd be further north than the UP for sure, where we are here.
Yeah. And Ontario, too, for people who don't know this country. People think about going out west to the Rockies and seeing Yellowstone and Glacier and Banff and Jasper and Lake Louise. Northern Ontario, like Wawa, Old Woman Bay, up between Marathon and Terrace Bay, that country is just as rough as anything you're going to find. Not as high, but it's just... I would rather walk through the Rocky Mountains than just be dropped in northern Ontario and have to walk out. It's just stone and cliffs and balsa firs that grow 4 inches apart and mosquitoes. And it is some of the roughest country on this side of the planet. And it's right there, man. It's just north of Lake Superior.
Oh, it is so beautiful. And that area, it's just one of my favorites. I try to make it up to that area as much as I can. And while you're driving through there, there's nothing. There's like no cell reception. There's there's very little. There's even places where the gas stations are closed. And it's not once you get further west and all of a sudden towards Winnipeg, where and southern Manitoba, where population starts to arise once you get back to farmable soil, essentially, right? Because it's very rugged. There's mining and stuff up there, but there's no real. It's all rock. There's nowhere that can sustain a large population.
Yeah. There's. I would hate to have to drill a well anywhere in that country. And what isn't rock is swamp because it's not draining. The land doesn't drain. It's just.
But it's so breathtaking, and it's like there's mountains. They might not be the elevation of the Rockies, but it looks mountainous.
Like think around like Nipigon. Or Nipigon. I'm not sure how.
Everybody says Nipigon, but the locals call it Nipigon.
Okay. Yeah. Either way you want it. Right. The mountains there and just to the east of there, they got to be 3,000-4,000 foot tall, I would guess.
I don't think so. I don't think they are.
They just look good because they're just sheer.
I think it's just the base of them is.
Well, let's say they're 1,000, and let's say they're 1,000 feet.
I think 1,100.
They're coming right from sea level, basically. The water level of you can see the lake right there.
Yeah. Superior is also the highest of all the Great Lakes too, right? So
I believe so.
Yeah, I could be wrong. I'm not really sure what the elevation. I feel like I should know that,
but that country, it is mountainous. They're not big mountains, but they're it's definitely mountainous. Yeah. And it's so rugged. Like you could go to Stone Mountain, which I love Stone Mountain, northern BC. Okay. Yeah. Maybe we're getting on the Canada subject. I love your country. I wish we owned part of it because I can't buy any of it, But you go to Stone Mountain. Stone Mountain is gorgeous. Stone Mountain is probably much more conducive to traveling around in on foot than any part of that northern Ontario.
Yeah, it's canoe country. You're either on a boat or if you want to get into the interior, you got to travel by canoe because there's so many little portages and waterfalls and lakes you have to hop between that you need something to pick up over your shoulders and carry from one body of water to the other. So it's all very much that's it's because of areas like that why the canoe was invented. Because walking is tough, and walking all the water in itself is an obstruction because there's so much of it. And horses, well, forget about it. Yeah, you know what I mean. So that's the way to travel in the traditional way, and still the way other than by float plane or helicopter that you got to move through that country.
Yeah, So growing up, always had this. You go north and it gets cool, right? Yes. In a nutshell. And then I knew you go farther north, it gets even cooler, right? Yeah. Go north, cool. Farther north, it's even cooler. But around senior year, I had some friends and I knew some people in school. Everybody's talking about what they're going to do after school. Yeah. I remember there were some people that really kind of had this like out west bug. They wanted to go to Montana or Idaho or someplace out there. I'm just thinking, I want to be farther away. I want to be at the corner, I want to be at the cul-de-sac of humanity, right? I'm like Alaska. Yes. Why wouldn't I want? It's like the biggest version of the Upper Peninsula. Because I'm sure every place. If you live in Idaho, the Panhandle's probably where you know, the most remote area. Or you live in Montana, it's the west and northern, it's the most remote.
So the way I think that I could describe what you're saying now is I always wanted to be where there was nothing further north than where I was.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that, just to be where you're not in the middle, you're at the edge.
Yeah.
You know, like in Alaska, you know, if you lived, what would be a good way to say this? Let's say if you lived in the middle of Wisconsin. Northern Wisconsin's beautiful. It's like this, but minus the rock, right?
Right.
But, you know, you go north, you're going to hit Duluth, and there's the rest of you're still in the middle of things.
Yeah.
But in Alaska, you're at the end. In Fairbanks, like that's the northernmost city in the country, where it's a city. You can get anything you want in Fairbanks.
Right.
You can go to the movies.
Yeah.
And
it's kind of like Whitehorse, I guess, where it's kind of a remote place, but because it's such a major center that you can like get anything you want there. Is it like that? Yeah.
And Fairbanks is absolutely like that. I spent a winter one time. This is early 2000s. I was in Marquette.
Yeah.
In the Upper Peninsula, Michigan.
Hockey town.
I wanted to buy some roof metal, and I had just come from Alaska, right? And in Fairbanks, Alaska, there's the Alaska Railroad, there's the University of Alaska, there's all the pipeline oil exploration, and then there's like all the bush communities. So like you said, even though it's a town, Fairbanks is a town of 50,000 people, the whole borough is like 80,000 people. It's fairly good size, but you can get anything there, and I mean anything.
Right.
Because it's servicing the entire state, basically. And I went into this lumber yard in Marquette, and I'm like, yeah, I'd like some 12-foot green metal. And he's like, what do you think this is, Detroit? You think we just got that on? And it made me so upset. Yeah. He's like, because like this guy's pulling that Eurotourist thing, and I'm like, I just came from Alaska. This is basically like Texas. You guys, what is this, like New York City down here? Just, you know, which two, somebody from the Upper Peninsula is just like sticking your finger in their eye, man. That guy was so mad. But he just, you know, he just said the wrong, because he thought I was from Grand Rapids or Lansing, you know, like, why can't I have everything I want in the UP? I'm like, I just came from Fairbanks, man. It's like,
you get that here too. People
this
move
is Mexico. This is so south.
It's not like Toronto, you know. Like, why don't we have garbage pickup, and why aren't the roads plowed faster? It's like, well, we're not in Toronto anymore, you know?
Right. And this guy's probably used to tourists from the south part of Michigan, you know, wanting everything.
Where's the all-you-can eat ribs joint in this town, anyways?
Yeah, but he got somebody from the other end. You know, I've been like on the west coast in the far north, and when I got down here, I couldn't get. You can get 12-foot roof metal from 7 different places in Fairbanks, because everybody's buying it. You know, the whole interior is buying their stuff from Fairbanks.
And people build their own stuff in Alaska too, right? I feel like there's that demand for it because so many more. I feel like that's such a very much an Alaskan thing to do. Part of the culture is to be able to do that.
Alaska has, to get into the politics of it, Alaska has no state building department. So they have a code like anywhere else, because there's nothing wrong with the code, but they don't have a state building department that like will issue you a permit and then come out.
Rules.
So if you want to build a house and you want to insure your investment, you hire a private inspector. They'll come out, check off your electrical, make sure your framing is right, your plumbing, and then they'll sign off. And then when you go to sell the house, it's been inspected. The next owner can get financing for it. So the onus is on you. That's the right word. The onus is on you to make sure it's right, which is, I think, the way it should be. In Michigan, you go through, there's a state department with a bunch of people who are waiting to retire, and they like putting their thumb on folks, and you're going to do what I say, you know. And
rules.
A
lot of rules.
So in Alaska, you don't have that. And so it's like, well, I'm going to build whatever I want. I'm going to build, as long as you're using your own money, you don't have to answer to anyone.
Amazing.
And then like Delta Junction, we got property in Delta Junction. We lived there for 6 years. There's not even a borough there. So there's no property tax. Right. People build $1 million house there and never get a permit or.
Well, here we're organized, they call it. So the township's organized, but so you have to go through all that process, which kind of sucks. And there's a lot of rules, bureaucracy, red tape. But, you know, some good things too, like some places don't have those rules, and when the population gains, you'll get, people just living in trailers all over the place or
Could
a certain
happen.
thing, which I don't really have an issue, but apparently I've heard that it becomes an issue in some places. I haven't seen that before, but I think people complain.
Could happen, and I think it could be a boogeyman conversation too.
Right.
Because I've been in areas where you got the building department, you got the code, you got the zoning administrator, and there's still somebody's dumpy trailer that's got 45 cars like my place when I was a kid.
And nobody does anything unless someone's going to blow the whistle on them anyway.
Yeah.
So if nobody complains, nothing happens anyway.
Yeah, and the people in power are like, do we want to kick this hornet's nest? And who is this guy? And is he going to throw a fit?
Alaska. I was thinking about Alaska before, but I'm not American. I wouldn't be able to work there or anything. I'd have to get a visa.
You'd have to become a Yankee like the rest of us.
I'd have to renounce my Canadian. God, could you imagine?
Oh, you could get like a dual citizenship.
I could, but then I'd have to pay taxes in both places. But then I suppose I could just pop over to Whitehorse and use the healthcare system or something like that. Maybe
it'd probably be worth it. Maybe I should do that.
Maybe you should, man. I'll be your sponsor.
Yeah. Do I need a sponsor? I don't know the system.
I don't really know what that means, but apparently it does help if there's somebody to like sign for you or something like that. Or
that'd be good.
Yeah.
Stick up for me, Jim.
Yeah. They know me. I'm like Joe Canada, right? Like they probably look at my YouTube channel and be like, oh, this guy's good. I believe whoever he wants
this
to.
This is Mr. Canada.
I might as well run for president. Just kidding. Not even close.
You should. I shouldn't get into Canadian politics. I actually know something about Canadian politics.
Good for you. I didn't think anybody else in the world cared.
Not America. We're so, we got so much political nonsense going on all the time. Like most people, they know Trudeau because a lot of people hate Trudeau.
Right. That's a big thing nowadays.
But, and they know Polyev because Polyev has got 100 billion YouTube shorts out there.
Yeah. Now that it's like more of a gong show, Canadian politics post-pandemic, I feel like more people know about it and are choosing sides.
I love it, man. You got that green room with the ugly green drapes, and one side gets up and they're like, Mr. Speaker, this guy's a douchebag because of all this. And then everybody claps, and the other guy's like, actually, Mr. Speaker, that guy's a douchebag. And they just go back and forth.
They just give it to each other. But, you're talking about a country with a population the same size as California.
True.
So you can't blame every American for not having it on their radar.
If Joe
doesn't
Biden
drive their economy as much as, let's say, the American politics drives Canada's economy, not even by a fraction of a percent.
No.
Yeah.
But it's so that setup, the parliamentary back and forth through the speaker, which you see, like that's entertaining, man. It's like I couldn't imagine if we could do that. Yeah. You get a lot of stuff settled probably because that's pretty brutal.
Yeah, they just there's no. Apparently, at one time they used to go have a beer afterwards. Else they'd argue.
Bet they don't now.
I don't think they do now. Anyway, I think they're keying each other's cars.
Yeah, Canadian politicians, man, they got a thick skin because they're in there like face to face.
Yeah, that's true, man. It's been some rough times though. But
I was going to tell you about bears.
I was just going to bring it back to that. So is this an Alaskan bear story or a UP bear story?
I have a couple. I have some of each.
Okay, because Alaska, you're dealing with. First of all, you're dealing with Kodiaks, which is, I guess, technically a type of grizzly bear.
That'd be on the coast, so it's a long ways away from
Kodiak
us.
Islands.
Yep.
And then, but grizzly bears. And you got the huge ones that eat salmon, and then the interior grizzly bears, and you have black bears as well. Probably on the North Slope, there might even be the odd polar bear in Alaska.
Oh, yeah. Alaska's full of polar bears. So it's on the coast, the northern coast. And the east coast, I suppose. I guess the west coast.
So you got a lot of bears.
There's a lot of bears. Yeah. But you were talking to Joe Robinette the other day.
Yeah.
And he was talking about bears, and you were talking about bears. And it just made me want to bring up I'm sure you've read the Stephen Herrera book, Bear Attacks, Causes and Avoidances, right?
No.
It's like the everything in one book about bear attacks. What's your opinion? I'll ask you before we start. What's your opinion of bears in the bush? How much do you think about it? How much do you prepare for it? How much would you recommend other people take it into consideration?
I think that having a healthy and realistic fear of bears or being bear mindful is a good idea. But I think overall, you be prepared, know what to do in different bear situations, and be serious about it. and do all that, and then just go out there and don't be constantly worried about it, and have fun. It's sort of
would
like,
agree.
You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like, okay, here's a firearm. This firearm, can kill people, but let's use it in a very safe way. Let's all be dialed into exactly how we use that till it literally becomes just a part of our own process that we're going to be safe, and then we can go skeet shooting and have fun. It's kind of, it's maybe that's a bit of an analogy.
No,
that
it
would
works.
Work for
that
it,
works.
Right? And so that's what I do. And I've seen grizzly bears. I've seen polar bears. I've had polar bears that actually probably wanted to eat me, that surrounded a little goose shack I was staying in before, which was kind of interesting, pushing on the walls and stuff. And I had one bear charge me, but we ended up scaring it off. But, you can't get unlucky.
Uh-huh.
You can't have that. They say that 1 in 24 grizzly bears is a psycho. And so people hear that one story, like those experienced backpackers that got killed in Banff like last fall, man.
Yeah.
And it was a psycho starving bear. Oh my God, could you imagine? And then the park staff goes in there to try to find their inReach, where they ping their inReach, and finds basically them being killed. And then the bear attacks him. It's dark. They got to shoot the bear. Terrifying. So these things happen, but your odds are so low. You can't, don't be scared of bears if you're not scared to get in your truck and drive to work every day. You know what I mean?
Statistically,
Right.
yeah. Statistically,
Yeah.
you're right. You have as good a chance of getting struck by lightning.
Yeah, I
probably.
just don't think that you should avoid I think you should be smart about it, but don't make it a reason to not get out there and freaking enjoy nature,
I agree. I think that's a good. And the reason I wanted to bring this up is because I think there's kind of two schools of thought on the extremes. There's the people that are panicked that there's a bear around every stump is a
Right.
bear, every
Which
acorn
a
falling
lot
out
of
of a tree.
beginners kind of get to thinking that, right?
True.
Yeah.
And I think there's this other side, which is just as bad, in my opinion. That's like, oh, bears will never hurt you. That's, you're worried for nothing. And the reason I bring this up, we lived in Delta Junction, which is 100 miles east of Fairbanks, right? When I first got to Alaska, I was going to a Baptist church. I'm not sure I'm a Baptist because I'm not a Calvinist.
Yeah, right.
But the guy who baptized me, his name was Johnny McCoy. So anyway, Johnny McCoy gets mauled by a grizzly a couple of years later.
Right.
This is one guy I know, right? I know this guy. And so we're here in Delta Junction. He gets mauled like 20 miles to the southeast.
Yeah.
And then over here on George Lake, me and my buddy Brian fished George Lake. Beautiful lake, hard to get into. You need a jet boat. Guy gets killed and eaten by a black bear on George Lake, probably a month or two after the last time I fished that.
Yeah. Wow.
Down here just a little farther in the range, a lady got both of her arms chewed off by a black bear on a scientific exploration. That's in that Stephen Herrera bear book.
Wow.
So it's like, you don't have to go very far from where and then like up here to the north, it'd be the northwest just a little bit. There's a mine. You'd probably know about it, the Pogo Mine.
Okay. Yeah.
2 guys were killed by a black bear on the Pogo Mine Road. So there's like several nasty bear encounters right around this little town of 2,000 people within the span of, a couple decades between the oldest one and the current one.
Right.
And it's like, when people ask me about bears, I give them about the same thing as you do. But, don't be terrified of bears. Go out and do it, but don't ever go out there thinking, don't be a Timothy Treadwell. These bears are our friends.
Yeah.
Yeah, he got ate and crapped out.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
because the Stephen Herrera book, it's called Bear Attacks, Causes and Avoidances.
So the reason I know this book is because they use a lot of it in a fairly recent study about bear spray compared to handguns, compared to long guns, and different methods of bear protection, all based in Alaska recently. That was kind of eye-opening, actually.
Yeah. And if you read that entire book, you will come to this unsatisfying conclusion on the last page that the only takeaway you can get from all of this research is that bears are one of the most unpredictable animals on the face of the planet. Yeah. 10 of them will do one thing, the other one will do something completely different, and there's absolutely no way to discern what a bear is going to do at any given moment. And it's really, all the case studies bear it out. It's like, You know, you can run into a grizzly digging for squirrels, and it gets up, poops itself, and runs into the woods. And the next
Which is my experience with black beds. They poo themselves and run away full speed. They're so scared. Often all you see here is a rustle of bushes, a patch of their black fur, and, you know, they were eating raspberries, and that's why they didn't hear you coming up, or they would have been gone long before that. You know, that's, 90% of the time. But you know where more people have been killed by bears than anywhere else in the world?
I would guess Ontario.
Algonquin Park, right over here. You know, because there's so many people, right?
Every other year I drive through Ontario and I hear the same radio program, just a different version. Like, bear attacks are very rare and you hardly ever see them. However, last week in Ontario, and I'm like, this happens every year. I hear this story. You kick on CBC on the drive home. Somebody's been killed by a bear. It's like Glacier. Glacier out in Montana. Somebody gets killed every year, every other year. There's all grizzlies out there. Well, I'm sure there's plenty of black bears,
but this sounds crazy about that one town. Just the amount of attacks that you were, like, you know, it's funny because have you ever read? Oh geez, what was it? It's about the Chok-Yitzhak Gwich'in of the Yukon Flats, and it's basically an anthropological book about a guy that went and lived with the Gwich'in on the Yukon River, who are the last sort of like hunter gatherers. And it's really cool because it talks about, it's all about how to hunt and trap and set lines. So it's a really interesting book to read when it comes to learning outdoor skills and survival skills. But really, it's an anthropology book, right? But one of the things that blew me away is, like, in this area, the moose of Alaska, the moose attack everybody. And in this area, they don't. So why is it that the moose here are aggressive and the moose over here aren't aggressive? You know what I mean? And he went into how dangerous it was, and you got to bring a gun because the moose are attacking everybody. And then over here, it's like they're running away. You're lucky if you get a shot at them. You know what I mean?
That's a good question.
Yeah. Like, I just think maybe, like, I got the same thing when I was in Labrador. I don't know what it is about the black bears here, but they're different. They're weird. They you know, the guy warned me, for some reason they just, they're more aggressive. Well, sure enough, that's where we were charged by a black bear in Labrador. But when I was in the bush, around Bancroft, where I grew up, shit themselves and run away full speed. Yeah. Right? So I don't know what it is, man.
I was in the UP.
It's unpredictable, I guess.
So it'd be two summers ago, maybe 3 summers ago. My brother and his wife were visiting. We're on that big piece of property in the Upper Peninsula.
Yeah.
And everybody left except me, and I was sitting by the fire reading this. It was a really bad book. It's boring. I was trying to get through it because I'd started. And the fire died out, and it's like 1 in the afternoon. All of a sudden, I hear chink, 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 and I open my eyes or look up, and bear walks right into camp. And it's got its head down, and it's from just a little farther than from me to you away. And I just stand up, and I'm like, hey! And it had no idea I was there. It was like in its own little world, like a raccoon would be.
Yeah.
Did you ever see raccoons? They're just like, they're
totally
focused. Yeah, and this thing was just like, I don't know if he was sniffing up a trail, because there is a trail there. Maybe he was following the scent of something else that had been through there. But he's basically in my lap. I'm like, hey! And he just peels. Yeah. Juxtapose that with several years back. It's probably 15 years ago in Minto. Minto's 100 miles west of Fairbanks. It's at the Baskin Village, and there's this huge flooding. I fished there forever. Love it out there.
Hunters of the Northern Forest is what that book's called.
You got to write that down for me.
I will, sorry.
Yeah, and you need to read Shadows on the Koyukuk by Sidney Huntington.
Okay.
Brutal. It's a great book. We're in Minto. And it's a flooding, so it's lakes and rivers all connected, and it's all flat, and it's all shallow. And we're in camp one day, and it's towards evening, and a bear comes into camp. And we're on an island. So he does not going anywhere, right? He swam out there, and until he swims somewhere else, he's there with us. Yeah. He comes into camp. I yell at him. We have a gun with us. We have a 12 gauge. And the bear runs off. I'm like, okay, both the kids are here. Me and the wife are here, I'm gonna keep a pretty close eye on this because this is a young bear. A lot of times the young ones are stupid. And I'm like, I'm not gonna worry too much about it, but this bear isn't very responsive. It didn't scare off.
Which is concerning.
Concerning, yeah. And he's not big either. He's 150 pounds maybe. Big enough.
Yeah.
Next day, I'm sitting there. I'm reading Ted Nugent book of all things. I don't know why. I don't know that Ted Nugent wrote many books, but I had one of them, right? It's like 6 a.m, and I hear something behind me. I'm sitting in a wall tent on a platform, and I got a little fire going. I hear something behind me, and the whole end of the wall tent is screen, so it's all just, you can see right through it. And this bear walks right around the corner, about from here to that wood stove, about 5 feet away. I tell everybody, okay, get up, everybody. This stupid bear's back. And
Wow.
so I just load up the gun and go outside, and the bear's down by our boat. And I'm yelling at this bear, hey, hey. And it's just acting like I don't exist. I'm like, okay, this is bad news,
Yeah.
So I put a round in, and I shoot a round over this bear's back, about 2 inches over his back.
Yeah.
I'm like, he's going to understand that, boom, and
Yeah.
big old dust and stick explosion on the other side where the round hits. The bear just flinched a little bit, and it turned and it slowly walked into the brush.
Weird.
I said, dude, you show yourself again, I'm going to put one right through you.
And how far away was it at this point?
35 feet,
So
probably.
close.
I'm yelling at it. I put a round over its back to warn it.
All the things you're supposed to do.
Yeah. I'm like, you show up again, you're going to have to go down because
Right.
you're obviously bad news. A lot of the natives there too in Minto, they don't screw around.
No.
The black bears get friendly,
Yeah.
They're like, that's not what they do, You have a bear that's like hanging out at the playground,
Exactly. And
It's
then
going in the
then
potlatch.
It gets a little hungry. And,
Oh yeah. It ain't supposed to be there, They're supposed to not be that interested. So anyway, those are my recent bear stories.
So what happened? Did you have to shoot that one in the
I
end?
never saw that one again.
Yeah.
But literally, that decision was made. Like,
Yeah.
I have 2 kids, like under 5 years old here, and
Well,
I'm on an
that's-
island in a flooding.
Yeah.
And this dude he's not responding. He's way too curious. He's way too comfortable,
Yeah.
and he could end up in your lap.
Right. Yeah. No, I had one like that too, where so this was a good bit further away than that. We'll say 60 yards, maybe 60, 70 yards. And it was up a steep hill, put its 2 cubs up a tree and started coming towards us. And we had like a wild goose in one of our bags and like some fish and stuff. We probably never saw people before. We're in like remote interior Labrador on the Adlatock River. And so I'm like, okay, we're standing close together, and I have a heavy rifle, 30-06. So boom, I see it coming to us. I let off a shot, a few feet away from it, hits the rock scree, dust goes into the air. And well, with that, it kind of turns around much like the one you're saying, although you're still thankfully much further. Oh, just kind of walking away like this. And okay, so what do? This is back to the unpredictability thing. Oh yeah. You yell, make lots of noise, make yourself look big. So I go, hey, beat it. My buddy's like, get out of here, bear, and like yells at it. Well, it didn't like that, and it just freaking 180 starts running full speed at us. I'm like, we're following the protocol, and they're like, don't yell. It's already leaving. I'm like, but it's not leaving fast enough. Like, yell as much as you can. Right? Anyways, it ended up hitting a patch of alders, and anybody that's walked through alders knows what that's like. So by the time it got through them, it wasn't running anymore, and we actually fired a bear banger at it, which it blew up right above its head, and that actually worked to scare it away.
Yeah.
Because the explosion happened right in its face as opposed to way back at the muzzle of the rifle. Because we were further than what you were. But yeah, it was weird. Totally against protocol.
And the next bear you run into might have done something absolutely opposite of that. Yeah. Joe Robinette had been, because I just listened to that podcast yesterday, so it's fresh in my mind.
Yeah.
I'd like to meet him. I hope we could drop by Echo Bay, but we're probably pinched on time, and I've never met him anyway. But one of these days.
Yeah.
He'd mentioned his air horn. He carried forever, and it didn't have anything in it.
How many years did that just not work for?
Oh, totally. It's like that walkie-talkie I'd mentioned in the Aleutians that was in the boat, in like a Pelican case in the boat. Like a week before we left, we took it out, and it was the whole battery compartment was just a green blob where it was all corroded. Like, oh yeah, we were toast. Nobody's coming.
Yeah.
But the air horn, the lady down in the Alaska range just south of Delta who had both of her arms, she survived, but she lost both of her arms to it just holds you down and tears chunks out of you type of thing.
Yeah.
She had a horn. and the bear was coming up the hill, up her trail. She blew the horn, the bear ran away, and then it came right back. She blew it again, and the bear kind of checked himself a little bit, and then came back. And after that, the bear didn't care at all about the horn.
Oh, this isn't hurting me. I'm not falling for this anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was the story that made me think, like, oh, I got to tell you about the bear horn. And Joe was talking about the horn and the unpredictability of bears and all the chaos in the Delta Junction area with bears.
I don't know if I have any right answer. I just live my life and be as careful as possible, Yeah. What about on Alone? Did you have any bear issues when you and Brooke were on Alone? Because I feel like that area and on previous seasons on Vancouver Island, there was a lot of bears, and maybe our season there wasn't as many because we came later and they knew it was going to be a cold winter, so they hibernated. But what was your experience with bears there?
I never saw a bear the entire time we were there. On day 3 of hiking, I've told you this story before, but I got into this patch of salal. Yeah. And salal, if you don't know what it is, it's a big green bush that grows. It's not a plant. It's more of a brushy type of thing. It's it's wood.
It's sort of similar to alder bushes in maybe not as impenetrable, but similarly not like horrific thing to walk through endlessly, we could say.
Yeah, it was thick enough that I could pretty much just lean against it and it would hold me up. There was enough of it, and there was probably 200 yards of this patch of salal. And where they'd clear cut the area, and then it grows up, and you can see it's like you can see both directions, left and right. It's just nothing but low green. You're like, oh no, this is like a sea of this plant. So I started crossing it, and it took me hours, and it nearly broke my spirit crossing this 200 yards of salal. Yeah, because you're making a foot at a time and just fighting for it. But about 50 feet into this patch, or 25 minutes into this patch of salal. Like I'm just sitting there resting and something about 30 feet from me, couldn't see it, just boom, gets up and just takes off. And I'm like, oh no, this is how it ends right here, man. But it was going the other way. Yeah. And it could have been a deer, or it could have been a cougar, or it could have been a bear, but it couldn't have been anything else because it was big.
Yeah, so I'm going to go bear. Because it was probably in there eating the last of the salal berries, which were already like alcoholic by the time we were launched in late October.
I think we launched the latest of any season on Vancouver.
Like after it was Halloween, the day, maybe October 30th when we left, right?
I don't remember.
And actually,
it's all a blur.
Yeah, I know. Well, I remember being, remembering it was Halloween was another one of the things we missed on top of Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's. Yep. So I remember adding that to the list. But I thought that was interesting. And, it was cool that Brooke actually brought this up just before we started the podcast about how we were the only people. So we say Vancouver Island, but technically we were on a completely uninhabited island. The only people that had been on that island were clearly loggers. Yep. But I don't think there was potentially any other than maybe scouting activity going on. Very little, if any, human activity whatsoever. Totally uninhabited island. And it was just me and Ted and you and Brooke. And we didn't even know the other one was there. And then you and I were the only people that had to deal ever on the show that had to deal with that kind of terrain and that kind of a challenge, because we had the hiking period where we were dropped off separately and we had to find, so you had to find Brooke and I had to find Ted, and then we had to survive together. And I remember one of the show consultants, Kieran or whatever, he's like British and he liked to swear like every other word.
Oh yeah, he was Dave Holder's right-hand guy. They were,
and he was like Brad Pitt's bodyguard and all this stuff. Like he was like a Dos Equis guy, kind of interesting dude.
Yeah, and he looked like nobody to mess with. Yeah. And then Dave Holder, I remember Kieran got up one time and in the lodge before we launched, and he gave this speech and. And he's a hard ass. You could tell he's like a British Marine, right?
Right. Yeah.
And then Dave Holder gets up, and I'm thinking Dave Holder's older than Kieran, and I'm thinking this guy's he's like some general. Right. He's gonna lay it on us, because these guys are British military. Yeah. And Dave Holder was the nicest guy in the world. He's just soft-spoken and he was like, I'm sorry for what you're about to go through, And Kieran was a great guy too, but we were all stupid.
Yeah.
Honestly, would you want to go? Just imagine going, this is going to sound derogatory. It's not meant to be derogatory, but could you imagine going to an alone boot camp today and listening to what the upcoming contestants assume is important?
Yeah, right.
It's like, oh, I got to get my, my squirrel trap figured out. It's like, no, you're not going to eat any squirrels. There ain't no. It's like, oh, I need to get I'm going to use this kind of bow with this kind of arrow and this kind of broad. It's like, you're not going to see nothing, man.
Yeah.
You're going to be eating the slugs under the rocks, or you're going to come in third place like me.
I literally remember scraping food off the bottom of rock. I don't even know what they were. They're like these little jelly things.
Yep.
And you press them and a little water squirts out of them. And we're like so starving. We're just like, like scraping. It looked like almost like hardened gravy. But let me tell you, they didn't taste like that. And we're just like eating those. And, we're imagining we're going to be netting salmon. Right. And this is, you go in with plan. I forget who said this, but it was one of the other participants in the show. You go in with plan A, you end on like plan E or something like that.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
You go in to catch fish. You go out to catch fish and you end up eating your fish bait.
Exactly.
After catching nothing.
Yeah.
Right?
So you wanted to bring this up too, this whole survival aspect. And I think that covers it. That covers it in a really direct way.
Yeah.
It's like if you think you're going to read Ray Mears and you're going to go out and I'm going to set up this water still with my plastic and my surgical tube. Who's got plastic and surgical tubing? If you're going to carry plastic, nothing against Ray Mears, by the way. I don't mean to make anybody mad.
Yeah.
But if you're going to carry plastic and surgical tubing to make this solar still, why don't you just carry some water? Why don't you just carry some water purification tablets?
Right. That would be a good way to go. Tablets. Yeah.
And honestly, like being comfortable as well as you can be and keeping a good morale and just finding things to put in your mouth and that aren't going to make you sick. That's kind of it in a nutshell, in my opinion.
Hop Wilson, he's never done the hardcore survival like alone, but has spent a lot of time in the bush. He says it's 90% psychological, just bush life, including just off-grid living and survival.
Yeah.
And just being out there is like, there's so much of the skills, and then the other vast majority of it is psychological. Would you agree with that kind of thing?
I'd say it's 90% psychological.
Really?
And we experienced alone, which is second best. It's as good as you can get by like a contrived situation, right? Where you get to pick things that you want to take. Yeah. And then somebody's going to come and get you when you're like, hey, I just put a fish hook through my eyeball, or I fell off a cliff. You hit your like inReach or whatever that brick, yellow brick. Yeah. And a safety crew that's 10 miles away is going to get in a boat or a helicopter, and they're going to come get you and take you to a hospital. In a real situation, you're either lost or you're stranded, right?
Right. Yeah.
Or you're injured and you can't get yourself out of your area. You imagine how hard that would be mentally? Yeah. Not knowing that nobody knows where you are, that they might have stopped looking for you, right? That nobody might bump in. It might be that nobody finds you in time.
Nobody has any idea where you are. Yeah. I compared that a little bit, not the hiking pier, but when we were on the coast, almost to like a shipwreck scenario. Your ship goes down, you grab onto some roughage, half conscious, and wash up on that shore. You don't know if someone's going to save you that day or the next day, how long you're going to be there, if you're going to starve, like all those. And, obviously being on alone, because we had that safety net, wasn't near as terrifying, but you still have all those kind of questions bombarding yourself. Is there a point of being out there? Do Brooke and Dave have a log cabin built and we're just sitting here suffering in this little crappy shelter, which of course you did. All these things kind of mess with you a little bit, and I think that's the reality. But you're talking about my Ngava trip that I did the same year, and and that was So okay, I didn't have that kind of. I was unsupported, right? Right, completely unsupported. So I didn't have that safety net, and I remember being out there being like, if there is a freaking if anything goes wrong, I'm so much more danger than what you're going to see on a TV show, and
never going to get
nobody's going to even start to come get me until the blizzard ends, and then it's going to take them days to get me, kind of thing. So in that aspect, it was more dangerous, but alone was harder. Like maybe not physically as much as an like athletic pursuit, but just hard with the, you know, the starving and the not knowing and the question. At least out there on Ungava, I can say, okay, I have this much food. If I eat half as much, I cut my meals in half, and I look at the map, I have this many clicks a day, I will finish it. You could come up with a plan that's tangible or that you can do. Can't do that on alone.
No.
You know?
And like we talked about a second ago, if you were really lost or stranded, you would have those questions like, am I going to get, is anybody going to find me? Does anybody know where I'm at? Will anyone stumble on me? But with alone, you have those questions like, who else is still out there? How many people are still out there?
Yeah.
You know, am I wasting away to nothing for nothing?
Is there no point?
Right. And then you're like, maybe you get stupid thoughts too. Like maybe everybody's gone and it's just us and they're just waiting for it to be like a later date. You know, like some Hollywood's like, 8 weeks is not enough. Give them another week. You know?
Totally. I thought the same thing.
You're like,
too.
you have no input. And then on the rare occasion when you do see production, when they come out to like make sure you're still alive and get your SD cards, because that's all they care about.
Right.
Give me your SD cards. That's the show.
Yeah.
They won't even talk to you, you know?
No.
You're like, give me a hug, man.
Yeah.
You know,
who won the
how you
World
doing?
Series?
And they're like, give me your SD cards. Here's a whole sack of batteries and don't die.
Yeah, right.
See ya.
Yeah, $10,000 or more worth of batteries.
It was such a unique experience and convoluted in a way because, I mean, you'd never be somewhere with like all the gear you want.
Yeah.
But it was like the best way to have a contest like that. And then where you actually, you know, you're trying to live off the land. You're trying to stay warm enough and you're trying to stay out of the weather. And then, you know, the chances of breaking a bone or having a serious, I mean, Ted put a hook in his finger.
Yeah.
When I was walking into camp on like day 9, I had rubber like crab fishing gloves on the whole hike, just going through the brush. I took those gloves off, and in the last 100 yards, I nicked a knuckle on a stump. Took a chunk of hide off, and it was infected for weeks.
Wow.
And it's like, when I saw Ted's hook in the finger, I'm like, that could be a real problem. Salt water,
I think, was why it didn't become more of a problem.
Really?
Because if that was fresh water, it doesn't have the natural, you know, curing or germ killing properties that the salt does. So I think that was a game changer. Also, that hook that he had, I don't know why he would have sourced such a crappy hook, but the barbs on it were fairly. Oh, I think we had to pinch them off.
We had to pinch them off.
You know what though?
Which is good in hindsight.
Yeah. So, but I think. I'm going to go ahead and say I think there was a barb on that hook, just not a very big barb.
Yeah.
So, you know,
well, there'd be a bump. Even if you pinch the barb down, there'd still be a...
So maybe that's why he was able to get it out more easily. But yeah, that was an absolute fail, setting that trot line. That's something that you can just read up on. We're like, well, we're just going to tie a bunch of hooks to a line and tie one end of the fishing line to a rock and throw the rock out, and then there'll be all these baited hooks and we're going to catch all these fish. Flash forward, stabbing ourselves, 0 fish, gushing blood, pitch black, tearing hooks out of our skin. Like the polar opposite, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's the only thing I really... That's the one piece of wisdom I think I brought to the show that I was really happy with in the end is that I was constantly being baited as you were, and they're like, "What are you going to do when you get out there?" And they want you to put your foot in your mouth. Oh, I'm going to build this massive shelter and I'm going to catch 1,000 fish and then they're going to play that clip when you're like just drenched in the rain, starving, you're like eating moss.
Right.
But all this shit you're telling people you're going to do, and they're going to be like, this is what he actually did.
Right.
So the whole time, you know, leading up to getting launched, they're constantly like, so what are you going to do when you get out there? How are you going to tackle the wilderness? And they're in these interviews, they're just waiting for you to say something stupid.
And
I'm like, I constantly told them, I'm like, man, I'm making no plans. I'm not going to assume anything because I know as soon as I get there, it's not going to look like what it does in my head.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, just say something so we can burn you later, you know?
Oh, man. And I admit, I was a bit of an armchair quarterback, too. Like those, remember the knife that we got that we spray painted yellow?
Cold Steel Bushman.
Orange. Yeah, so the reason I got that, and I'm not saying this was a bad idea, but was because it easily changes into a spear.
Yep.
Right. So a normal
I
knife,
have one of those too.
right? So a normal knife, if you want to make it a spear, it's going to be like a bayonet. You're going to lash it to the end of a pole.
Yep.
But you can only stab as deep as that knife is going to go to the end of the pole. With the Bushman, you can put it right over and just run something through.
Yeah.
My brother's like, "Why do we got this?" I'm like, "Well, what if we get to stab a bear?" Because I remember Nikki. In her book had actually pit trapped the bear and stabbed it to death when she not in the show. But
I was going to say
Nikki, who was actually did her own little survival mission on Vancouver Island.
Mm-hmm.
She did like Tom's Brown School and some other survival schools, and she went out there and lived there.
Saskatchewan, right?
BC,
okay.
BC, yeah. And so she ended up going on the season that was up on Great Slave and in the territories, but she had actually done that. So anyways, just a completely unrealistic scenario, and then me too, same thing. Oh, I'm going to go build a boat faster than Jose did. Took me the exact same length of time to build a boat as Jose. And Ted
Jose's boat was really beautiful.
And it was a lot better than mine. That's for damn sure. Yeah.
But he couldn't pilot his boat. I mean, it looked great.
Yeah.
Jose did a beautiful job on that, but he couldn't even keep it upright.
He dumped, yeah.
So I mean, it was
mine housed me and Ted. There's some good things about it.
Yeah.
But it was also, I'm going to build a boat fast and with like a more crude, game plan.
Yep.
But which it was, and it took us as along. So, kudos to Jose. But is there anything else that you can, like when it comes to survival, what did you learn about what you thought survival was or what you think most people think survival is and what it specifically turned out to be in our situation and in the broader sense of survival situations?
I don't know if that's a hornet nest posing as an opportunity to share, or what that is.
Well, I'll give you one of my little ideas on it. Okay?
Go on.
Okay, so one of my ideas, and you kind of touched on this a little bit, was that you think that there's way more time to do bushcraft creations and to do survival projects.
Yep.
Like, for example, you look in the book, SAS Survival Guide by John Lofty Wiseman, and there's all these different kinds of shelters. And we're like, look at these shelters. Maybe we'll build this one. Maybe we'll build two. No, you know what? We'll build this one here. And then way over there at the different fishing spot, we'll build another one. And it's like, pick one of those things.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And there's
That's
all these
very true.
Right? So it's sort of like, you think you're going to have time to do these things, but you become quickly restricted by the walls of your own, hunger and weakness and need to just go get food. Does that something you could relate to?
Yes. One thing I did learn, you'll totally get this, is what you can squeeze out of yourself during the course of a day is about a fifth of what you think you can. Like, you'd get up, boil some water, make yourself something to drink so you got something in you. The tide's not right, so you're not fishing yet. You go cut a little bit of wood, get wood for the evening. And it seems like you could never cut enough wood.
Right.
And then even a little bit of wood, it's taken enough time and you're filming, so that's kind of unnatural because you're not going to do that if you're actually starving in the woods.
Right.
But like, I didn't think we could get anything done. Like, everything took forever. And you're grabbing this gear that you're just living on like protein and water.
Yeah.
So I think you don't have that carbohydrate energy. You got like the slower, like, bulldozer speed energy type of thing.
And no fat, very little fat.
I lost a pound a day.
Wow.
And I never really dealt with hunger because I had, I've got like this giant scar up the front, right? I've had 2 stomach surgeries where I had like a fibrotic tissue bowel obstruction type of thing. This was like 4 years where I was being treated for Crohn's. Yeah. I didn't have Crohn's. I had like this fibrous, like, it's like scar a fibrosis scar tissue type of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was constantly like dealing with a constant stomach ache, and I couldn't get along with food. Like, there was a lot of times where I just didn't want to eat. Eating hurt. Yeah. And I was always hungry.
Yeah.
So like, hunger to me wasn't new. So hunger really kind of never bothered me during alone. It really drove Brooke kind of batty. And you know, a lot of people are just obsessed with food.
Yeah.
And I was
have been ever since.
yeah, I would get these, I don't know, kind of episodes where like 3 days I'm like, man, a donut. That'd be the best thing in the world. But it was more like a mental, like that's what my body wanted at the time is sugar.
Yes.
Like I had like a week of spaghetti. Like, man, spaghetti. If I got out today, spaghetti or an omelet, and I love omelets. I'm like, man, I'd be the first thing I'd eat is an omelet. And then I had like a cheeseburger phase. But I never was.
I remember where you're like, that button, the tap.
Oh yeah, totally. That's the cheeseburger button.
Right there. Yeah. But
That's the pizza button.
Then when you tap out, you find out you can't really stomach everything you thought you were dreaming about.
They wouldn't feed it to us when we finally tapped out.
Yeah.
And we knew Brooke was going to get pulled anyway, so it's like, well, what are we going to stay here for?
She did. She was getting pretty slim by the end. Well, we all were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm almost today. I'm almost the weight I went into alone. Mm-hmm. I've been much fatter in the last couple of years.
Me too, man.
Yeah.
Me too. I just can't stop eating everything. That people are like, what did you spend your money on? I'm like, food. I just felt like, I guess in a way, maybe your body, you just hold on to that after you've had that starvation experience.
Could be.
Maybe you hold on to it. So maybe, if you in that situation again, you'd do better.
Could be.
Your body's trained to it. What was I going to ask? Yeah. What do you think it's like to, if you're going out there for as long as because you were out there for a good period of time.
7 straight weeks.
Yeah.
49 days is what we ended up with.
Right. So you think that they were going to end up pulling you in the end? If
Not me, but Brooke.
Yeah, okay.
Because I came in nice and fat like I usually am.
Right.
I was past all the stomach issues at that point, and I think I was 236 going in. Which is plenty normal for me. I was 256 last year, and I'm back down around 236.
Right.
But I was 193.
Yeah.
And like you, 193. So that's like Marine weight, right? You'd be ripped, but not a guy like you.
If I was 210, I'd be like skinny.
Yeah, exactly. Right. That's the same way with me. Like at 193, I look like a skeleton.
Right. Yeah.
I'm just my frame's not built that way. So I don't know how far I could have got down.
Yeah.
But I think I could have done another 2 weeks. I could have done probably as long as you guys did, an extra day.
Oh, I think so. And yeah, probably. Yeah, I mean, we were close. When Ted got sick, Ted fell and almost completely soaked himself one time, but he managed to save himself. If he had gotten soaked, and then when he had that crazy intestinal issues. Like, we were sort of like, maybe we should bail, but Ted all of a sudden just jumped up and chopped down a gigantic standing dead yew tree. I'm trying to tell him to stop, and I'm like, and this is amazing. Like, Ted's back, and we had all this wood. But, oh, geez, I keep forgetting what I wanted to ask you because it was a really good question. Okay, so this is what it is. Yep. Compared to survivalists, okay, because we see a lot of different people with military background. It just seems like whatever your background is or survival background, but there's a difference between survival skills and actual survival. Practicing survival skills is fun, right? So what do you so it seems like the people with real bush time, whatever their real background is, just have spent time in the bush, are usually the ones that can sometimes last the longest. How do you think your background and this is me going into the show too, Dave, right? I'm thinking like, well, I'm not a guy that naps arrowheads and typically starts bow drill fire.
Me neither.
Like the bow drill fire I started at boot camp was the first bow drill fire I've ever done.
Yeah, I knew we were up against the wrong people when I think it was Ted that I saw, because you guys, for the people that haven't heard this story, we're in upstate New York. We're tasked at boot camp for alone to build a bow drill fire. It's all hardwood, very unconducive to bow drill.
Yeah.
Jim and Ted, they take a 5-mile hike, find somebody's 100-year-old cedar fence post, rip it out of the ground, tear it apart like a couple bears, and they get the dry cedar, which was the only thing. And they come back, and I think it was Ted that I remember at that particular time. He's got the worst form I've ever seen
He
anybody.
just invented that form himself.
Yeah, he's like leaning on, like laying on it, and just like
And the
like
British,
not
the
quitting.
British survival guy's like, interesting form.
Yeah, and like he gets fired, and all these real survival. There was some really like there were some very serious survival nerds, to put it that way. It's not the way I want to say it, but people that were like, you know, like these guys from, there's a couple guys that had spent a lot of time in the desert, and they'd made friction fire 1,000 ways, but it's horrible to do with hardwood in that environment.
Damp hardwood.
And you guys find like the only suitable wood, and then Ted like literally forces it to burn, and I'm like, uh-oh.
You know, Ted had actually done that before. He'd actually made fire like that before, but he never read up on the proper form. So he just invented this like weird form, but like, I mean, you can't argue with success,
You
right?
cannot argue with success.
So what do you think it was that, why do you think you and Brooke were able to last, you know, as long as you did? And then Brooke, of course, in Mongolia, lasting as long as she did.
She lasted the longest of any of the women in Mongolia.
And she probably could have stayed longer too. She just came right off of the other alone
She
season.
was right off of the previous season. I don't think she'd even got back up to weight at that point.
No. And so what do you think it is about your and Brooke's lifestyle and just your past experiences that made you good? Because sure, that's related to the outdoors, but it's as far as I know, related to survival, but it's not like you are a survivor. You don't bill yourself as a bushcrafter or a survival expert.
Nope.
So why do you think that you were able to be a better survivalist than people that kind of bill themselves as survivalists?
Well, that's a good point. Like, I don't think you and Ted, it's a good question too. I don't think you and Ted ever billed yourselves as survivalists. You guys were adventurers. You're backcountry travelers.
We're bringing like 10 lighters, every bag, you know?
And then like, I remember hearing the story, you know, about Ted getting poked in the eye with the stick, and he's got like this gangrenous pus draining eye, and it's like, you need to get him out of the bush. And he's like, I've been waiting for this trip all year. Yeah. And he takes the rest of this trip with a gangrenous, like pussy eye.
That was gross.
And it's like, you can't learn that.
Yeah.
You either are that person or you're not that person. So for like a Jim or Ted Baird, it's like, it's such an incredibly high threshold for suffering. Like, that is going to pay dividends if you ever need it. Where somebody that's like got every book ever written on bushcraft and survival, they might have an intellectual, encyclopedic knowledge of like how to get fresh water, but have they ever tried it? Right. Have they ever been in the middle of nowhere and not had their doodads and gadgets and like actually put this to the test when they're like in a rainstorm and it's 30 degrees and they don't have a place to get out of the rain? And
right. And it's not fun anymore.
From a really nuts and bolts standpoint, when they told us we were going to Vancouver Island at boot camp, I'm like, okay, I'd never been to Vancouver Island, but I'd lived in Sitka.
Right.
Not much different.
Worse.
And I fish Valdez, and Valdez is a hellhole. Like, beautiful place, but you wouldn't want to get in the backcountry there because you can't see the ground. It's so thick. It's all broken. Everywhere. Devil's Club everywhere. So going to Vancouver Island, I knew that almost everybody there had seen the show version, which looks completely different than the actual being there version, right?
Right.
You can't get it in the camera what you're actually living through. It's two different things. So I had no illusions of what that country was going to be like. I'm like, I know what that country looks like, even though I've never been there. So it's like, this is going to suck. It's really going to suck.
Yeah.
And
I feel like it's good to go in there with knowing this is not going to be a cakewalk, right?
Yeah.
You know, I feel like if you think it's going to be easy, you're going to be sorely surprised.
There was one guy that was with part of our group, and I won't mention his name. Nice guy, good person, and probably a lot of good cred, real cred. Yeah. And he'd mentioned he was gonna, you know, on day 2 he's gonna shoot a deer and put it in a tree, and then on day 4 or 5 he's gonna come back and find it. And I'm like, you have no idea.
You have 100 miles of flagging tape?
Yeah. Do you have a GPS? Like have you not been outside? Because we were on Vancouver Island at the time, and we had all been out in the bush, like just doing camera training and stuff like that. And to hear somebody say what they're going to do in that environment, and they're going to travel a dozen miles and then come back and get this deer that they're going to find and shoot, and then they're going to put it in a tree. It was literally like
finding a needle in a haystack would be a gigantic understatement.
It was so
you'd be better off to find a needle in a haystack.
It was so divorced from reality. I'm like, you're not even paying attention to what this is all about here. You're gonna. Yeah. I found, and I've told you this before, kind of off subject, but on that hike, we had compasses. You have to have a compass. You never get anywhere. Yeah. But I would pick a tree 50 feet away, get on my compass heading, and I'd walk to it. And when I'd get to it, I would always guess like where the next tree was.
Yeah.
I'd pull the compass up, and it'd be like way off, like 45 degrees off. And I'm just like, I wouldn't get up.
Sometimes blowing myself away and just been like, I got to trust the compass, but I can't believe it's right.
Yeah, absolutely. You know? Like, you're like, that's not right.
Yeah.
It's like, I was right back there and I walked here and now I got to go to this tree, and you pull up the compass and it says you got to go that way. And it's like,
how is that in a straight line? Yeah.
I wouldn't have got 100 feet into the bush without the compass. I just walked in circles, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I remember out of anybody too, it was, you and Brooke and also Sam and Pete, and I think it was the three of our groups that ended up staying out there longer. But we were sort of sharing ideas and things with each other. I think we were a little bit less worried about that. And I remember them coming up and telling us some compass navigating tips, and me almost like getting in an argument with the guy who is the head of the search and rescue. Like that is the worst advice. And so what I do, and honestly, they say it's bad because you can drift off your bearings. So you can hold a compass flat in your hand. You can have that north needle inside the red housing in your compass, and you can walk sideways and just hold it like that. You know what I'm saying? So that would be walking off your bearing. That's why they say, try to put one foot in front of the other, which is just an awkward way to walk, especially there.
You can't do it there.
Impossible. But you have to. And that's what I kept my compass with the lanyard wrapped around my wrist and just kind of tucked it into my sleeve, and I'd pull it out, and I'd take little short sightings, but I kind of just walked as straight as I can, holding it in my hand. And I feel like you have to. Like the whole sighting something in the distance and walking to it, and then to make sure you're going to were you
I remember
really
that conversation.
That? Yeah.
No.
Dude, yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Most of the time I felt like I was like an ant in somebody's lawn, Everything is just
I
mean, there was the first day I hiked, I don't know that I don't think I saw my feet more than 10 or 12 times.
Yes.
It was brush, like chest high brush. And just vegetation, and it had all been logged dozen years ago, 2 dozen years, and it had just grown back into just literally bush. And I'm just walking. I don't know what I'm stepping on. I don't know if I'm about to just go down a pit or fall over a log. You couldn't see the ground. It was so thick.
Yeah.
And so it was absolutely impossible to be like, oh, I see that mountain, and I never saw a mountain. No. All I saw was rain.
No.
Rain and bushes,
Yeah.
And then
did you hit any lakes on your way?
I walked around a big lake.
Yeah.
And
I wonder if it was the same one.
Could have been.
We'll never know.
I know I walked around it as the direction I was coming. I went around it on the right-hand side, and it was a steep hill. Yeah. Like that whole hill was covered in downed, like wind down trees.
I walked through something like that too. So down trees on the edge of a steep hill with tons of salal. And you literally have to climb over a huge pile of down trees.
I climbed over a lot of logs, but I don't remember there being a bunch of salal in that spot.
Okay.
I know when I was almost around the lake, I came to a patch of hemlock, new growth hemlock that were all about 4 inches apart,
Joy.
They're about as big around as a golf ball,
Yeah.
I had to literally like Tyrannosaurus Rex my way through these trees because it was impeding the way, You couldn't go through it. You just had to wedge your way through it.
Yeah.
And what a slog, man. Makes me so happy to be a YouTuber and not a TV survival guy, you know?
Oh, yeah. Well, I do some fairly crazy stuff for my YouTube channel, but nobody's, and you know, I guess now that it's said and done, I'm thankful for that experience.
Oh yeah.
But who in their right mind would ever go out there and do that?
I don't know.
You know what I mean?
To kind of wrap the thought up, I think if somebody is super interested in survival, or if they have a lot of books, they like the whole bushcraft survival genre, and they like the idea of being part of Alone. They just want to be part of that world and test themselves out.
Yeah.
I think the best thing you can do is take a knife, a sleeping bag, maybe a little bit of kit with you, so you're not just bare hands, you know, and go somewhere 2, 3, 4 miles away from the road, the highway, the whatever, the way out, and spend 3, 4 days. It sounds like nothing, but it's a lifetime to just be by yourself for 3 or 4 days, trying to like find food, trying to fish a creek with maybe all you have is a line and a hook. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like nothing. You know, I'll go in the bush for a couple of days and I'm only a couple miles from a road. Nobody does that. No. Nobody does. And I think one of the most interesting observations from season 1 of Alone was how everybody came in with this bravado, like, you know, I could be here a year, you know, this might. And that's because nobody actually does that. Nobody goes into the woods to try to survive. People say that. You'll see that in the comments on your YouTube channel. Like, oh, I lived 3 years in the bush, just a soup pan and a rusty knife. And it's like, no, actually, that's not real.
No, that's true. It's not.
Because, you know, the people who were going to do the first season of Alone, and the production crew and the safety people that are there to save you if you die, you know, that come in a helicopter and get you, you know, 8 hours after you break your leg, they had to walk in and get the one fella in the middle of the night, which would have been loads of fun.
Yeah. It was bears, right?
Yeah. Yeah. None of those people had a frame of reference of how long it was going to last. They assumed it could go as long as a year. 55 days, everyone was wiped out, emaciated, you know, in terrible shape. And there was only a few guys that made it past that first week window, really. Yeah. So to go do 3 or 4 days in the bush with very minimal gear, make sure you got something to stay out of the rain with, because hypothermia will get you way quicker than hunger by a long shot.
And also, you know, have good fire lighting skills. Just have the basic skills, because you know you can go without food if you don't catch or forage anything.
Absolutely.
You're not going to die, but you'll get a good idea for what it's really all about pretty quick. I would agree. I did that when I was probably a young teen. Where we don't need to bring any food, mile portage from where we parked a motorboat into a backcountry lake, and we don't bring any food, just fishing rods, and we're going to eat mushrooms and bullfrogs or whatever. Well, we didn't end up finding the boat in there. We thought there was a boat, but someone had sunk it, probably a bunch of drunks or something. And so we were only fishing from shore. And let me tell you, like, we all had to split this tiny bit of fish, and we were just shoveling in. We were out there for 2 nights, and we got home and we were just like, like eating everything that we could find, right? It was like nothing, you know, it wasn't. And then after that, I'm like, I'm not messing around with that anymore.
Yeah. And a camping trip with your friends where you got old Milwaukee and everybody's got sleeping bags and tents, and most people that are interested in survival have done that. Right. You know, a camping trip with your buddies dozens of times. They think, I've been out in the woods a lot. Yeah. And it's like, well, don't take your friends, don't take your food, and don't take your gear. Go try it. And you realize that nobody ever does that. And it's like, it's lonely. Your brain is kind of all over the place because you're like, man, I've been here forever. And if you had a watch, if you brought a watch, you'd be like, I've been here an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Or you think like, I've got all day to do this, and you start working on whatever this is, and then it starts getting dark, and you're like, I got nothing done.
Yeah, totally.
And it's such a unnatural experience to be lost away from the rest of humanity in a wilderness situation. If somebody really wants to get into that and be part of that, maybe try Alone, maybe, you know, maybe just be part of the survival bushcraft community. Yeah. That's probably, in my opinion, that's where they should start. Don't worry about what brand of knife you have and what kind of grind is on the knife. Right. And these topics were beat to death 10 years ago, and it never mattered in the first place. Mm-hmm. You know, just don't get caught in the minutia of it, and like the forum world, I suppose, where, you know, like this person says, well, this is the only way to do this. The other person's like, that's exactly the wrong way. Right. You know, just this internet rabbit hole. Yeah. Take a little bit of gear, go out for even 2 days, because nobody does 2 days alone.
Yeah.
And you go spend a couple days in the woods, minimal gear, try to feed yourself, try to stay warm, try to stay dry, and you'll know more than 99.9% of everybody out there who has an opinion about it.
Yeah. Wow. That's a really good way to look at it.
Do a
I
week,
would agree.
you won't even be able to talk to other people after a week.
Right. Yeah.
Because they will have a different perspective.
Yeah.
That's the one thing. We talked about this before, Jim. That's the one thing I really wanted out of Alone is, like, you knew right after watching season 1 that the people that were out there 30, 40 days, 20 days, whatever, those people were not the same people anymore. They did not have the perspective that they came with. And, like, that transformation, to me, that was like the real goal. Like, I want to be that person that understands what this is like, because I probably would think I did if somebody was, you know, like the camera people before launch, they're trying to pump you up. Yeah, you've done all this cool stuff. You're gonna crush it, right? And you're like, I don't know. But you have a tendency to feel like, yeah, I got this.
Yeah. And that's what you were looking to get out of it?
I wanted the perspective of the people that had been there 30, 40 days, or even 10, 20, 15 days. Because those people are like, okay, it's not about, you know, when they were done, when they're pulling people out, they're not the same people that came in. Yeah. They don't have the bravado. They don't have any of that. I'm going to crush it.
Humbling.
They've lost all of that a long time ago.
Yeah.
They're like, that's, you know, like, what do you want now that you're out? And like, I want my feet to be dry.
Right.
I want to be able to sleep without, you know, my side getting wet from being, you know, up against.
Just the basic human needs are all of a sudden much more coveted, you know, that you took for granted.
Yeah, and take that guy like a Dave McIntyre, like a Jim Baird. Take that guy and put him back in a boot camp with all these kids. I'd call them kids, but they're our age, older, younger, just the spectrum of humanity. Yeah. Who are getting ready to go into Alone. They're like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. It's going to be awesome because I know these things and I've got these tools and they're dialed in this way. And it's like, talk to me in 7 weeks, man, because you're not going to be that same person. That guy's going to die in the first week, and whoever you are at the end is not going to be that guy.
Yeah, it's humbling, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
and you realize, like, I made some good choices coming in. I made some poor choices. I made good choices with my time. I made poor choices.
Yeah.
If I had this to do again, it probably wouldn't be as fun because, you know, you can only take so much misery. And if you were like the people in Mongolia, which was a one-off season, for everybody that doesn't know, the next season of Alone, they had previous year contestants. They went to Mongolia. Yeah. Brooks said it was like a funeral. Before launch, where with us it was like a party.
Everybody's like, like waving at the camera.
Green.
Like,
we were the last year that went to Vancouver,
right? And
Vancouver's like original Alone, you know. The green helicopter came in. Everyone was like, it was such a party, and we're like, we're really here. We really get to do this, you know. In Mongolia, and Brooke will tell you about this when you talk to her. She said, you know, it was like everybody was subdued. It was like a funeral. Everyone's like, oh man, I don't know if I want to do this again, you know, like.
Yeah. They didn't have the, they knew
everybody
terror
knew
that they're about to put themselves
there was none of these macho, you know, like boot camp crowd.
People were much more humbled. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And then they knew that the stress of what that experience is going to be like. They know, like, if I do halfway decent, I'm going to come out of here, my joints are going to ache. Yeah, my stomach, I'm going to not be able to eat right for months because certain things are going to upset me. I'm going to probably get too deep into my thoughts. And, you know, we're kind of on our own little planet, you and I, because the season 4 crowd, we got to do it with another person.
Right.
And the rest of the Alone seasons, they had that isolation factor that we didn't deal with to the same extent.
Right. Yeah.
So there was a few people from season 4, and of those people, like Brad Richardson, he really didn't get a chance to be there very long because Josh tapped early. And Brad and Josh, nice people, good folks.
Yeah.
But the people like Carly, and Carly got robbed because
Right.
she'd done so much in season 3.
Yeah.
And then the very beginning of season 5, like she's the first one out.
Yeah, with the hook in her.
Yeah, heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And then Nicole was great on season 2. And, season 3,
The MS.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
She was falling down. Like she couldn't.
Absolutely.
Got a huge bout of MS, right?
absolutely.
I think that there's all kinds of factors that are completely out of your hands. And I also think that there's sort of a lost fallacy that if you have all these skills, you're going to be able to survive. But I think people forget there's a finite number of calories in a given area.
Totally.
And no matter how good you are, you can't manifest calories.
That's true.
Did you find that you saw things more clearly like this when you're out there? You know how, for example, like people fast, or natives, a lot of indigenous North Americans would go on like a vision quest where they'd fast for 3 or 4 days and they'd see things more clearly. Did you, through fasting or hunger, if you think about it, did you see any of those kind of realities of survival or anything else more clearly while you're out there than when you're back home? And I always thought it was just because I had time to reflect on it, but looking back, I feel like I did, and it probably had to do with the fasting or the starvation is probably a better word.
That's an interesting question. I like to give you a couple things on that. Number one, we were catching quite a bit of fish.
Yeah.
I went there with the only skill I had is
great
like building
method.
and fishing. I like building stuff. I like fishing. So I'm like, I got a chance, right?
Yeah. If I'd incorporated your message with your tactic with the different line that you could break off and the rock, we probably would have done better. I was just kind of casting, and you were kind of had like a set line with a weak line tied from the bottom of your hook to a rock. Yes,
it was a breakaway sinker setup.
Amazing.
And I lost like 8 hooks, and I'm like, we cannot do this anymore. And it was like a sit down and figure it out.
Yeah.
And it was like 50-pound test with a hook, kind of like a Schnelled hook off to the side.
Yeah.
On the 50-pound, and then it was a 20-pounder, 10-pound, and then the rock on the bottom.
Yeah.
And I figured out a knot where I could tie a rock on and with like a jam knot, and it would clinch and not come off. And then you're getting snagged every time you throw it in the water, because it's all barnacles. And so that breakaway, that saved a lot of hooks. We were doing okay fishing. So I think as far as a revelation of how things actually are, I probably never got past the idea that, we're doing okay. We got a chance because we're eating every day.
Yeah.
But when I would go to bed, you talk about clarity, I would look forward to laying in bed at night because like your head was like crystal clear, and you could almost sit there and enjoy thinking as much as if you're watching a movie you hadn't seen. You're like,
yes,
you just sit there and think, and your dreams were like insanely vivid.
Yeah. Do you think that had to do with the reduced, because you're eating, but I think one of the things that people also don't realize is how much food they really need to sustain. Like even if you're having one good meal a day, and that's it, you're still fasting. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And like you can't just not eat for 5 days, slam a Big Mac combo and fries and be right back to how you were 5 days ago and do that again and again.
No.
Right? So it's still like, I wonder now reflecting on it if some of that clarity that, I had like things I wanted to do in my life. I'd have all these ideas and thoughts and excited about it. I wonder if some of that had to do with being hungry,
I think so.
Yeah.
I really do. Because like you said, even though you're eating, personally, I was dropping a pound a day. So that says a lot. And I'm not doing much because everything you do just feels like you're just wearing lead britches.
You're not banging off cardio on the exercise bike out there.
I actually had this great big chunk of driftwood. I was using it to like split other chunks of firewood. It was like and I set a firewood on it and split it because the ground was so soft. It was something to set wood on to split. And it was huge, it was foot thick and 3 feet long. And I drug it up from the beach, put it where I wanted it. And like day 30, I went to move it. I couldn't get it off the ground. I'm like, I'm wasted away, man.
You realize you'd lost that much.
Yeah, I couldn't pick it up. And I'm like, that says stuff I don't want to hear.
Yeah, that's so cool, man. It's so interesting to sit down and talk with you. We haven't chatted about it for a while, but just somebody that was on the same season that did the same hike.
Same island, even.
Yeah, same little island. It's so cool.
Yeah.
But, okay, well, I also think that, a lot of the stuff that you have done in your life, which is very fascinating, by the way. Thank you for sharing it all.
Appreciate it.
There's a lot of other people that might want to try that, of all different age groups, that might think they can't do it, or where do they start? Is there any tips you can give people that are looking at maybe buying that first piece of land, and maybe want to try building a cabin, even one of the simpler cabins that you build, or maybe a log cabin? Is there some tips or just mindsets that you can share that would be a good kind of place for somebody to start that wants to sort of emulate some of the things you've done?
Kind of everything we've talked about, it's kind of all tied together. I'll put it to you this way. Building a cabin, caretaking a homestead, and the subsequent building projects from there, which ultimately, spills over into YouTube later on. I did all of that because I didn't want to just punch a clock, and I always wanted to at least have control of my own time, right? Yeah. So as opposed to getting a job, I got a contractor's license, and I had a little cement finishing business for a while, for like 7 years. Yeah. And then as opposed to buying a house, I built a house. And I always just wanted to do things my own way, which a lot of people want, right? All of that building and caretaking and traveling and stuff, that made it really, really easy to get on a loan, to work with National Geographic. Like that backstory opened all those doors. And then later on, I monetized most of that stuff through YouTube. Yeah. Even the first cabin we built, which had nothing but photographs. Yeah. And the time in the Aleutian Islands, which was nothing but photographs. I managed to make videos out of those. They're like slideshow voiceover videos.
Yeah, which are amazing.
And I got to share that experience, which had so little to show for it, but through YouTube. So to kind of tie the thought together, like you gotta ride your own ride, man. You got to do what you want to do in life, and don't get stuck settling. Don't get stuck settling for something that you're not happy with, unless you're wired that way. And some people are. Some people, like if they get that job at the factory and they got a time to be there and a time to leave, and they get 2 weeks a year. Some people need that structure. I've got friends like that they need to like have, this is my schedule, this is what I'm doing, this is what I get paid, this is how I can budget it. Nothing wrong with that. But some people aren't wired that way, and we shouldn't expect them to fit into that mold. Because, I mean, like, take yourself, for instance. You just burn up and poof, turn into smoke if you just, had to pump gas every day. Right. And, like, couldn't get out and do the stuff that you love to do on the river and filming and adventuring and stuff. Yeah. So you kind of got to ride your own ride, which is a motorcyclism.
Nice.
Even if you're riding in a group, you're riding solo. You got to do your own thing, right? Mm-hmm. And if you're happy, you've already won. If you decide you want to go to Mexico and dig clams on the beach, and that's what you want to do with your life, if you do that and you're happy, you've kind of already won. But to take that farther, maybe that's going to open a door for you that you don't know about at the time. Maybe they're going to make a show about digging clams in Mexico. Who knows? Mm-hmm. And you're teed right up for it. And then,
so true, man.
Yeah, and then like later on, you're like, man, maybe I should do a podcast about clam digging in Mexico. And it turns out everybody's interested in it, and and you're like that guy from the TV show about digging clams in Mexico. That's his podcast. And it kind of, the odd lifestyle that you have, an odd lifestyle, it's kind of these compounding avenues. Yeah. For me, it's been, I built a cabin because I didn't have the money for a house. I built a little dry cabin because in Fairbanks, there was all kinds of dry cabins. That was not unusual. It was normal. Like the outskirts, the mountains around Fairbanks, lots of bad land. lots of cheap little dry cabins for rent or for sale, or people build for themselves. So that's how I came into building cabins. Nowadays, I make 90% of my living with a camera building cabins.
Right, right.
And it's given me the opportunity to buy real estate as an investment, and I can put a cabin on it for when I want to use it, and I can monetize that through video, and anybody can do that. I mean, and it might not be that same pattern or anything close to it, but you got to do what you're kind of cut out for. You know, like, did you ever think that portaging was ever going to be an economic engine for you?
I thought all that stuff, you couldn't make a dime ever since the fur trade era.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, what do you do for a living? I carry boats through the woods when there's no water to run. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
but that's part of what you do.
Yeah.
And maybe nowadays, I wouldn't say maybe. I would say nowadays, it's kind of the golden era for being able to share what you do with other people. Like, I've made thousands and thousands of dollars digging outhouses. Who does that? I'm the guy on the internet digging outhouses, and it's because I need an outhouse at this property, or I need to fix my outhouse in Alaska, and it's like, well, I'll film it, and people watch it, and it's like, I have a video that has 1 million views of my brother and I building an outhouse. Yeah, and I wake up and think, this is the weirdest life I've ever had. You know,
yeah.
But that's possible for it's possible for most anybody. You just got to do your thing, man, and then try to figure out how to make it work. Pretty much.
That's awesome, Dave. I think a lot of people can take a few things home from that. Is there anything? Where can people find your stuff? We talked about Bushradical on YouTube. Is there anything else? You don't have any other social platforms or anything like that?
No, and Bushradical is actually, it's not a bushcraft channel.
No,
we've talked bushcraft a little bit, so I actually got that name from a random band name generator on the internet.
Nice.
It's like if you want to start a rock band and you're like,
type in a name. I've seen those before.
It's like, what's your favorite color? Like green. And where do you like to go? I like to go to Kentucky. And then you're like, what do you do in Kentucky? I like to run dirt bikes. And it'd be like, and then spit out a name like Green Appalachia Motorcycle or something. And that's your band name. And there's like 10 different versions. And I'm like, I want to be a YouTube channel that's camping and outdoors and living on the fringe and like, going against the grain, and it spit out Bushradical, and I'm like, all right, that works.
That's a great name, man. Yeah, well, because you're in the bush, right? Bush has a lot more to do than just bushcraft, right? Like, it's bush and you're radical,
absolutely.
No, I think that's a great handle. And your son's Mickey has started a YouTube channel as well. What's his channel?
His channel's called Betting on Alaska,
right? And
he's in Delta Junction. We lived there for 6 years, and he has a friend group that's all kids he grew up with that are still around there. So it's it's not really like it's his adventure and his life up there. Yeah. But that's his home, really. Yeah. I mean, it's just as much of a home as Michigan was because we lived there about the same amount of time.
He's born there, right?
He was born in Fairbanks in a real estate office.
Oh, there you go.
It used to be a birthing center. Now it's like West Madden Real Estate.
Okay, good. It wasn't a real estate office.
It wasn't a real estate office at the time. Yeah. No. Yeah. But as far as Instagram and stuff like that, I don't even have the internet on my phone. Like if you sent me a text, I wouldn't be able. I'd have to have you email it to me, and I get on a laptop.
That's just so on brand for you, though. I love that.
So I have no Instagram.
Probably save a lot on your phone bills.
I guess I just got talk and text. It's like $30.
Yeah. See, Canada, we get gouged hard in general for mobile service, but it's like $100 a month for me, Canadian, probably more.
Yeah. So just YouTube for me.
Yeah.
I don't have anything on Instagram or TikTok or what's the other one? There's another one.
Facebook.
Yeah. Facebook videos. That's like a thing too,
Facebook
right?
Watch. Yeah, that's all part of Facebook.
Yeah.
Ted has done well. My brother Ted's done well with that, just speeding up some of his bushcraft shelter builds, and like gone crazy viral on Facebook too. Yeah.
I've thought before about asking Ted about that because I knew that he'd done well on Facebook.
Yeah.
but he never shows up when he's supposed to.
Right. Yeah. He had a pretty
Ted,
good excuse.
Ted, if you're watching this, we expected you to be here, and you ditched us, man.
You broke some hearts, including mine. But
that's all right.
He had a good reason, though.
Yeah, I know he did.
Yeah. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. So how are you going to argue with that? Yeah.
But email is the other one.
Yeah.
Is email is. I have my email address on the YouTube channel.
Yeah.
And it's funny actually. Like of the alone people.
Yeah.
My channel is the third biggest channel of anybody.
Congrats.
Joe Robinette's.
You hit 1 million subs recently.
Yeah.
Not too long ago.
I'm on my way to
huge.
1,000,001.
Wow.
Joe Robinette is the biggest, of course. And Zach Fowler's right behind him.
Zach Fowler's put a lot of work into it for sure.
Yeah, he's got a ton of the guy's got a ton of ideas.
Yeah.
And he's pretty he's really prolific. He puts out a lot of stuff, and he's really good at what he does.
Yeah.
I've never met Zach or Joe, but I'm in third, which seems to be a theme.
Oh, man.
I came in third on alone.
Now that there's a competition, I'm going to have to step it up. I would have started doing YouTube earlier if I'd known that people would actually want to watch some of my longer, more slower paced content. And I think part of the thing that was good about it is when I got on YouTube, I started getting serious about it. I'd won some money from a loan, so I could take the risk. Well, I'm going to film this whole thing and just use it for my own channel as opposed to selling it to a magazine. So I could now take that risk. And second of all, I already had the experience doing what I was doing. And then I had that whole extra, dump of how to film things properly from the producers of Alone.
That was helpful.
Yeah. So when I got back into YouTube, I could all those kind of things combined, and my YouTube channel took off. And I was just thinking, man, I should have started this early. I had no idea people were going to want to watch me do that. And I realized people actually learn more than we think. Probably I've probably learned more than you realize I pick up from your videos. And one of the reasons I know this is because I went out and I did a canoe trip with some younger guys who are also YouTubers, and I see them lighting a fire the same way as me, where I essentially get all my tinder, my all little sticks, and I just hold a ball, even as well, I just hold a lighter under it for a minute or more until it catches fire, and I put it down, and I put all the sticks. And I see them doing that. I'm like, where'd you guys learn that from? They're like, oh, from your videos, man. It's brilliant. That's what we've been doing it for years now. I'm like, I didn't even know I didn't even know I was trying to tell people that,
Yeah, I think that's good policy, is to never underestimate what people pick up.
Yeah.
There are people who watch your videos, my videos, and they're not watching the video at all. They're just looking at the background.
Yeah.
So you do this podcast and somebody will comment I got that same world geography book that's over there in the corner. You guys can't see it, but it's on his bookshelf. And they see stuff like that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So you really, I'm constantly just reading comments. People are like, oh, you got a TW200 motorcycle. It's way in the back. It's Brooks. It's
right.
You
didn't even think it was in the shot.
All you can see is the rear tire because it's got a huge. And people there are certain people who they're not even listening to what you're saying. They're just looking at the background,
judging.
Probably
for better or for worse. Yeah, cool.
But the YouTube thing, people that want to get into that, you can spend a ton on camera gear and audio gear. You can shoot it all with a GoPro. It's really more about value. Try to figure out the thing that you would do, that you have experience in, that you've got some insight in, that other people want to watch, and put those together. And because there's a lot of stuff I don't film because I'm nobody's going to watch this.
Right. I would like watching your little motorcycle trip there up to see your buddy while you're hammock camping and you're feeding the gray jays and you got a few different cool GoPro angles and, probably wasn't your best video ever, but I thought that was pretty fun, man. I enjoyed it.
Yeah. Do you ride?
No, I don't.
Okay.
ATV, snowmobiles, but not bikes.
Got it.
I don't need too many more dangerous hobbies.
Probably
but it's
not.
Definitely something that I might do, So yeah, no plans as of yet. I know who to call though because I see you. You've gotten back into it, eh?
I have.
Yeah.
I do a lot of kind of what they call ADV riding, like adventure bike riding.
That would be right up my alley.
A lot of it, I'm just putting back roads 30 miles an hour, where there's no traffic. So it's
not dangerous at all.
Yeah, you got kids, I got kids.
Yeah.
That's pretty. Riding in traffic in the city is never going to happen for me. But
Right.
in Alaska, it's great because you can get out of town in these just dirt roads. You know, it's way out in the country, and drive 30 miles an hour and just
Yeah.
look at the scenery.
My Uncle Michael, technically my mom's cousin, he used to ride competitive motocross, and he's like, "Oh, I won't ride a bike on the street in the city. That's too dangerous." But he's like flying off things, and guys are crying. I'm like, "Really?" And he's like, "Seriously?" He's like, "Everyone's going the same way. You don't have buses and trucks and drunk drivers and to worry about." And he was just saying that motocross was way safer.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. So, anyways, looks like a lot of fun and all of it. So.
I like the old man motorcycling, you know. But the adventure bike stuff is basically just big dirt bikes you could put luggage on. Then you putt around. It's a lot of camping, too. A lot of moto camping.
You ever been all the way up to Prado Bay there? Or that's one some people do, right? Up the Pipeline Road? Is it Prado Bay? Or it goes right up to the North Slope pretty much, doesn't it? Or
I think you can go up to Dead Horse is the last place.
That just sounds like a cool place named Dead Horse.
Yeah.
It's like such a long walk that the guy's horse just died underneath him because it's so far.
Yeah.
That's what I get.
And I'm on that road a lot, but I never go super far because you go up to the Brooks Range, you get on the other side of the Brooks Range, you're like on the moon.
Right.
It's just flat and it turns into like this Arctic tundra.
Oh, Alaska, it's just so diverse and cool.
Yeah,
man.
it's
I think that might be an area I start exploring a little bit more of. It's just that they don't allow external loads on float planes, there, so you can't strap a canoe to the struts, or apparently it happens a lot, but I think maybe you're not. It's frowned upon, or not as many people do it, or whatever.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know, but I do know there's a lot of rivers, like the Kuskokwim, I think, crosses the road.
Yeah.
Like 400 miles
So you
north
can
of
get
Fairbanks.
into it.
You get into that, you could go all the way to the Pacific Ocean. It'd take you weeks and weeks and weeks to do it. And there's a river up there called the Canooty. It's north of the Yukon River, and it's just a creek crosses the road. But I had a buddy of mine go down that in a raft, moose hunting. Yeah. And he said the first 3 or 4 days down that river, they just used a chainsaw every day because nobody'd been down that river in decades. He said there was so much wood in the water.
Yeah.
He finally got to where it opened up, and he said the fishing was just phenomenal. He says there hadn't been a soul on this river in 10 years probably. Yeah. And then it dumps into, I don't know what it dumps. It eventually dumps into the Yukon.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you could see some stuff.
Yeah.
Even in trips that you don't have to plane into.
Right.
It's like if I could do a trip with you, we could trade trips. I could take you to Alaska and we'll fumble through, and I'll be no use to you because you're the expert. And then we trade to where I could get the trip I want. I would idea. Let's do it. I would like to fly into Newellton.
Yeah.
It's in Nunavut now, right?
It's it's in Nunavut and northern Manitoba.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
I read an account one time years ago. It was a Ben East story of a couple guys that flew into Newellton, Lake Newellton, and then they couldn't find the Thwasnia.
Oh, yes.
And then they finally found it, and they were like the first outsiders that had ever floated the Thwasnia down to Hudson Bay, and it's like,
it's in No Man's River as well. A Farley Mowat book too.
Really?
No Man's River. Yeah. So that lake is huge. There's nowhere even close to the closest road. There's a lodge on it, a fishing lodge, fly-in fishing lodge. It starts in the taiga forest, and the northern part of it is just in the tundra. It's so big, and then that river, the Thwasnia, I think is how you pronounce it, but it goes right to Hudson Bay. So it's a totally canoeable, paddleable river. There's rapids on it that can be portage. You're not forced to run anything crazy. And then you just have to figure out how you get back to somewhere by the time you get to Hudson's Bay, because when you get there, you're just like polar bears and there's no other kind of civilization. So you have to get like a boat pickup or some sort of plan for some sort of boat or charter or something at that point. But it would be extremely badass.
Yeah, it'd be pretty epic.
Yeah.
I would do that one.
Now, you do that one?
I would do that.
Oh, man,
absolutely.
we got to do it.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, next summer.
Got it.
Okay.
I'm free.
All right. Well, maybe that's a good place to end this chat, man. Leave people with a cliffhanger. Thanks, Dave.
Good seeing you, brother.
You too, man. Really good having you on, man.
Yeah. I appreciate it, and thanks for having us.
You're welcome.
Brooke's here, too. So
Gonna get Brooke next, yeah.
I say us, and there's just me.